listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is time now for another edition of the most disruptive show covering news, events, politics, and more from across the disunited states of America and the increasingly divided surface of our globe. In the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am your indefatigable, burning ember in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together that means you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, good morning, everybody. Hope you're having a good one. Let's get into the headlines. First up, in COVID news, more than 36,450 new COVID cases were reported in the United States yesterday, just under 370 new deaths. Over the past week, there has been an average of 39,124 new cases per day. That's a decrease of 29% from the average 2 weeks earlier. This comes as more than a third of the American public has been fully vaccinated, and almost half of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected more than 32,772,500 people across the United States and killed about 581,669 people. The Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine has been approved for teens aged 12 to 15, and the drug maker Pfizer is also looking to expand the ages of those who can be treated to kids aged 11 and under. This is here in the United States. In national political news, President Biden has said that Russia is not responsible for an attack on the Colonial Pipeline, saying that the Russian government, however, has, quote, some responsibility to deal with, end quote, a Russian cybercriminal gang that the United States has accused of the attack. But it, good thing that they're not trying to pin yet another thing on the Kremlin, I suppose. In international news, at least 7 students were shot and killed during a school shooting in the city of Kazan in Russia, as a 19-year-old who had attended the school opened up fire. 11 were said to have been killed, with over a dozen others hospitalized with wounds. Israeli and Palestinian forces have been openly warring as Israelis celebrated Jerusalem Day, a celebratory holiday marking Israel's taking of East Jerusalem in the Arab-Israeli War of 1967, the June War. Hamas threatened to launch rockets if Israel did not withdraw. This is while Ramadan is taking place. There's been a lot of fighting over the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Anyway, Hamas threatened to fire rockets if Israel did not withdraw. Israel did not withdraw, so Hamas fired rockets. And now Israel has been, Israeli military forces have been launching airstrikes. There has been much fighting, dozens of people killed, reportedly. And this is all an acceleration. Anyway, that is happening right now over in that part of the world. Official figures from China show a slowing birth rate, with 1.41 billion people currently in China reportedly, which is an increase of just over 0.5% from 2010 to the current level, so a very low increase. 3 journalists and 2 activists who fled to Thailand from Myanmar are being put on charges of illegally entering the country. They will be returned to Myanmar if convicted. And registration has begun in Iran for Iran's presidential election next month. Current President Hassan Rouhani cannot join that race, as he has already served 2 terms. And with that, those are our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And there we go. We are back in the studio. It is day 2 of our return to the studio. Going well so far. It's, Jamarl, I've got to say, it is actually quite convenient. This whole thing with the house being close to the office place, this has been good. This should be good. I'm excited about this. This is very good.
I'm happy for you, man.
Thank you.
I'm genuinely overjoyed. My heart is like exploding for your.
That doesn't sound good. Maybe back off that a little bit, but thank you.
No, seriously. I am happy that you're back. And honestly, I'm happy to be back in the studio. And so it's far easier to be like, hey, Shane, you taking this one? It's like, yes,
exactly.
And then you give the thumb as opposed to just 20 characters.
We'll also have like stories to relay on the air sometimes in a way that we really wouldn't have had during lockdown. What do you talk about during lockdown? You can talk about the funny thing like your cat did.
Yeah.
Or that you
Or the
said.
dog.
Yeah, or the dog.
Something
Exactly.
like that, yeah.
But there's just such a limit there. But, we're going to be in D.C. We're going to be around. Maybe we'll relay interactions that we've had.
I think so, yeah. And we're out the house now, so there's that. So, yeah, it's a different animal.
Yeah.
I like it. I'm feeling it.
Yeah.
So, yesterday, within the context of these stories, I was thinking of this notion, and the monologue is going to be on this, but we can start now on this notion of populism without populace. Like, is that possible? Is it possible to be a populace without the populist part to be a part of that? Because that is exactly what Joe Biden is doing. Like, if you think about it, Joe Biden is coming out saying, we're going to give child care. It's like, yes, child care. And we're going to invest in the future of America. It's like, yes, we're going to do $15 an hour minimum wage, which we're not going to do. We're going to do the PREC, which we're not going to do. And you do this, all of this, and then you say to yourself, like, all right, well, he's a tick to the left. But there's no crowds. There's no momentum. It's just him saying, I'm going to do this. And there's nobody to negotiate with because Republicans don't fight on that front. And so you just have this kind of weird populism-ish without any notion of populism associated with it. And you look at the polling, and he gets, like 53% in the polls. And then you look at the other polling in regards to efficacy in getting out the vaccines. He's at, like 70-something%. Even among Republicans, he's really high. He's a populist without being a populist. Like, he's not engaging the mob. Like, so, like, if Joe Biden wanted to, Joe Biden could come out and say, I am doing this for America, and scream into every microphone. Now, I don't think he has the ability to do that. I don't think he has powers to do it. But if he did that, imagine what he could potentially get accomplished if he had 20,000, 30,000. Like, if he was pulling Sanders crowds as he went to places. And it's like women would take off their shirt or men would take off their jeans and throw it at him. It's like, you got rid of my school loans. Oh, thank you, bro. It's like that type of stuff. What would that look like? And what could Joe Biden get accomplished if indeed he had that in him? He doesn't, though. That's the catch. And whether he doesn't have it in him from the standpoint of his physical ability, whether he doesn't have it necessarily in it because he doesn't actually believe it, I don't quite know which one it is. But I do know he is giving you this kind of weird version of populism without the mob. And mobs are accountable. Like, mobs get very angry. If you tell them, we're going to give you your student loans, and you don't do that, well, the mob is going to be very angry at you. Well, there's no mob. There's no nothing. It's just Joe Biden saying, I'm going to do this and that. It's so weird. It's like, it's bizarre. It's not like an LBJ. In fact, because he's so disengaged, he's like a puff of smoke. By the same token, he's saying, I want to do this. Put it on my desk. Unions built America. Like, he's doing that constantly. I've never seen anything like it. It's the most weirdest thing in the world. Have you noticed that? Like, in the way he runs?
Yeah, no, I've just been sort of feeling that through and seeing which parts of it I agree with. And I agree with quite a bit of it and trying to feel if there's anything that I glaring holes or that kind of thing. But he is. And, there are different angles that are a little bit more familiar to talk about with it. Like, you can talk about how he's consistently made promises and then often failed to deliver on them. And so you can say, it's early days. He's setting the agenda. He saw that Trump had in terms of the way that he spoke and the kinds of experiences that he appealed to and just his delivery. Trump wasn't an Obama very clearly. He was more of a, rambunctious public orator or something like that. I don't know. He had his own way of doing things. And I think that even though Biden is very much not Trump, he is trying to imitate the slightly more folksy way of talking.
Yes.
He's trying to step into that. And
I think, yes.
He's making that part of his image, and another part of his image is this is the good older president. He's had a lot of political experience. He's coming in and look, he's doing kind of exciting, cool stuff, that kind of thing. I think what's weird, if I were a Democrat, I could come back with a retort and say something like, Jamarl, but aren't you just sort of surprised to see a president actually doing something for you? Like you could try to turn this into a Democrat victory.
Right. Right.
If you wanted to.
Right. But that's my point. Like, the populist thing would slam that. I mean, you're basically fighting for America unopposed. Doesn't touch it.
Yeah.
Like, this is not like an FDR rallying the troops. He doesn't care about the troops. And in fact, one of the weaknesses of the Obama administration is when Obama got in office, Obama was like, all right, everybody can go home now. I got this. And it's that. But it's that with the idea that, okay, Obama was too far to the right, so I'm going to go. It's very strange. It's almost like he is recognizing that there is a contest going on outside of this country with China, and that he, on some level, has to invest into America in order to compete just with China. And so it's like, it's that. I think it's this issue of the virus. I don't know. It's just...
There's this weird political silence in general right
yes.
now. I think with, particularly, it's like we've been in, I'll put it like this, we've been in a 75-year nap since World War II. We've been in a long-term, sort of
political hiatus. Yeah.
active dream state thing where we kind of lost track of our future in some sense, maybe in the 60s or 70s or 80s, and since then, our perspective of where we're going as a society and how we're going to get there and all these things, those questions have increasingly found pessimistic answers or no answers at all. We're not really asking those in that form anymore at this point, it seems. We've been there for a long time, and it seems like with Trump, it's like when you're sleeping and it's raining outside and you wake up in the middle of the night because it's just so loud or something like that. And now we've gone back to sleep, and Biden is a sleepy figure that appeals to that and makes it easier for us to keep napping. I don't know. But my point is, there was a lot of political activity around Donald Trump, more than any president as far as I can tell, any president living to this date. Trump faced more controversy.
Yes.
Whether it was the 2 impeachments or the breach of the Capitol building just a couple months ago, or the kinds of crises that he had to deal with. There was a lot of stuff that happened during Trump. And so there's a relative political silence with Biden simply because he's not Trump. But I think that what is in Biden's best interest and in the White House's best interest right now is to keep that political silence going and deepening and make it easier for people to just quietly slumber, if that makes sense. And I'm 100% serious.
Yeah.
If you can satisfy and appease, this is the bread and circuses argument that people would make about the Romans. It's not, oh, they're just giving us bread and they're just giving us circuses. The original thing has to do with
distraction.
It's a distraction. Exactly.
Yeah.
You give people the bread, you give them their basic means of sustenance, and then you give them a circus, which is something entertaining and Colosseum-like, and there to distract your attention and sort of entrain you in whatever they want to have, however they want to have you captive. It's exactly that principle, except this time the bread is Tums and the circuses are sheep jumping over a fence or something like that. But it seems like, Jamarl, what do you think? It seems like we are in that quiet mode right now politically.
It seems like it's the tensing of a muscle, and that muscle being relaxed. Like, it's like Donald Trump is in office. Everybody's heat up, like, oh my God, what is he going to tweet tonight? And, it's like they took him off Twitter after he was president. And it's like, so wait, you think he's going to do more damage as a civilian than you did as a president? Like, so it's like, it's tense, it's released. And then all of a sudden the media is like, whew, we're back to Biden. We're okay with this. We like this. Oh, we like this. This is back to, it's that stuff. And then you get Biden, too, fighting on this notion of workers' president. Like, Donald Trump came in and started getting blue-collar workers. A blue-collar billionaire beat Democrats at a populist. Like, that's mind-blowing, right?
Well, here's the thing, is you sort of stumbled along something which just brought an interesting thought to me. You said something like, could Trump get more done not being the president? Could he get more done as a civilian? Did I hear you right?
No. I was saying, like Twitter believes, at least based on their logic, that he is more dangerous as a civilian tweeting than as president.
Yes.
And it's like, why do you believe that?
I think they're just looking for any way to hem him in, anything under their control. I'll put it like this. If you were like the person who personally delivered Donald Trump's mail, you would be under a lot of pressure to like read his mail or something like this. And similarly, if you're the social media platform that's platforming Donald Trump, you're under a lot of pressure to change how you platform him, to deplatform him, whatever. My point is, any position that's handling a person of that significance, their communications, their powers in general, anyway, they're going to want to get hemmed in. But this idea that Trump has more power out of the presidency, which if you look at what Trump was able to do with the presidency, theoretically, he could have done quite a bit more as a private civilian than he did as president. And
I don't think that's true.
you don't think that's true?
If troops out of Afghanistan, he could never do that as
But
president.
could he pull the troops out of Afghanistan as president, or is Biden pulling them out?
Well, Biden is pulling them out, but I don't think he would have ever gotten to the point. Like, can you ever see Biden ever doing that without Trump giving a primary?
I can see people lying to Trump and convincing him things that aren't true about where our troops are stationed in the Middle East, for instance, in Syria, which actually happened in the Trump presidency.
Yes,
it's just weird to me to think about the idea that Trump would actually have less power as president than as a citizen, which is maybe theoretically possible because as president, he's getting lied to so much. What he wants to get done, he can't actually get done. If you think about, and I want to go into the break here, but if you think about how many constraints there are on any genuine
want to get something done.
But a president coming in and genuinely trying to change something at a foundational level, or like push back against strong elements within the sort of bureaucratic backstate behind America, the continuum of the intelligence community and the State Department and the Pentagon and, all of the contractors that tie these groups together, and just like this sort of morass of different organizations. Anyway, we need to go into a break.
This is the Thanos issue, meaning the glove. Like, you have to be able to know how to use it, if that makes sense. It's like, yes, you have all of these powers in regards to the president of the United States, but there's some people who know how to use that power better than others.
Yeah.
And I think it's that. It's this kind of institutional knowledge that Donald Trump may not have had that, for benefit or, to the benefit or the detriment, it was his detriment. I mean, he was like, they were leaking stuff on him constantly. It's like Donald Trump wants to pull the troops out of Afghanistan. Oh, here's a leak saying, the Russians are killing Afghan. It's like, clearly you can't pull it like this.
Yeah.
Donald Trump wants to shake the hand of Kim Jong-un. Oh, can't do that because, you have this thing where all of a sudden there's a leak saying that these guys are building a nuclear reactor and he's taking Donald Trump.
And that's the
suckers.
The bureaucracy, this whole thing. Like the idea that there's a sort of network of different bureaucracies, different institutions and organizations that get important things done in different spheres of government. And that tying all of this together, creating this network, is all of this sort of implicit knowledge on the part of the people who are part of these organizations about who to get in touch with and who to set up for meetings with whom and how to get A through, this machine and turn it into B or whatever to get proposals implemented. That whole idea of being an intermediary and a connector of these organizations, that is how so much actually gets made. And you don't know who to get it. It's not a computer directory that you can tap into. Right. It's a human directory that's sort of distributed, that you have to know the people, you have to have the relationships, you have to be able to get those things done. That applies in pretty much any organization once it gets big enough.
That's right.
If it's bureaucratized. But it particularly applies in the case of the federal government of America, with millions of employees, big sprawling organizations.
And honestly, maybe it's too big. I mean, maybe, you get to a certain point in regards to organization size and a person can't manage that like that.
Yeah.
Like, not knowing, like, how many departments are in the government? Like, you know what I mean? And within the context of those departments, a president coming in, he's not going to know that stuff.
And who created these things?
Right.
We're sort of touched with these things were created decades, generations ago.
Yeah.
And then we're sort of living in the bodies of these. We got to go into a break.
Yeah.
Living in these things. Anyway, you guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We are in the studio again. It's exciting, folks. And we'll be back with the rest of this first half hour in our soapbox segment with Jamarl's monologue. You're listening to Fault Lines. Be back on the other side of this short break.
Fault Lines.
By Any Means Necessary is your guide to the movement and efforts shaping the world around us, from mass incarceration.
No longer am I interested in or concerned with prison reform. I am interested only in the eradication of prisons.
To the battle between police and water protectors.
It was a pretty punishing disregard for the sanctity of human life, that unleashing water cannons on peaceful, prayerful water protectors.
From efforts to protect the environment.
The climate movement is ready to, with plenty of opposition research and force and strength, along with, the right of both science and morality, to fight them on this.
To the movement for Black Lives.
When I first saw the Michael Brown video, and I saw that it clearly contradicted the narrative put forth by the Ferguson Police Department and by police supporters in general, 3 words came to mind: color me shocked.
Stay tuned to By Any Means Necessary, 5 days a week here on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host, Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM at 1390 AM. We are also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you guys want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. So Joe Biden, as we were talking about before, is doing this kind of weird, odd politics that unfortunately is working. Timid, cowardly, wild man for the Democratic Party. And yet, this seems to work. They seem to have taken the standpoint that under the normal model of a race to the bottom with the death grip between Republicans and Democrats, if we move a tick to the left in order to give voice to what the public believes it wants, I mean, for God's sake, you've had 1 million people that drop dead. So maybe the public is on board for this notion on some level of reparations. And so we are going to scream, America, and we are going to run this way. However, we don't really want Americans involved in that. Because if you bring Americans in, that's the mob. And the mob requires accountability. The mob will march for you. They would go on Twitter and Facebook, and they would run blindly into fires of armies of bots and fight for you over and over again. And when the smoke clears, your Twitter army and Facebook army will still be there. Those bots that they paid millions of dollars for will not. That's what your Twitter army would do for you in regards to fighting for you in the mob. Even from the standpoint of putting out leaflets and flyers. It's like, Joe Biden's going to get rid of all of the student debt. They'll be so excited. Like I said, they'll be throwing their G-strings at you. Men and women throwing their G-strings at you. And you'd be so excited as Joe Biden. You'd be standing on the stage. You'd be like, oh my God, I've never seen this many people in my life at an event for one person named Joe Biden. They would be so excited. You'd be dealing with their real material issues. Yes, I'm going to give $15 an hour. Yes, I'm going to do that. I'm going to knock the parliamentarian out the way, and I'm going to throw Kamala Harris down there and say, do it. That's what I'm going to do. I'm Joe Biden because I believe in these things. I'm going to be the new FDR. That's what you do when you believe it. And those people would be right there with you. The catch is the mob requires accountability. And the moment when the $15 an hour didn't go through, the mob would have booed. They would have booed. They would have got there like, boo! What's wrong with Joe Biden? Joe Biden is not living up to the moment that the PRO Act didn't go through. They would be like me, radically cynical in regards to what I expect on these items. But there is no mob. There's nobody for accountability. There's just Joe Biden. And Joe Biden standing there, puff of smoke, barely there, wisp of a man that he was, wisp of a man. And he's just saying things. Put it on my desk. PRO Act. Put it on my desk. Unions build America. It's just that. And then people would clap, and he goes somewhere else. Nobody knows where he is. Just puff of smoke. And he'd come out, and he'll say something like, you can't have people on starvation wage, but not do anything necessarily about it. There's no mob. There's no push. There's no nothing. It's just Joe Biden. There's a pressure from the standpoint of society. There's a pressure from the standpoint of what Joe Biden wants to accomplish in regards to pushback against China, or in regards to this kind of pushback against Republicans, or this notion that we need the Democratic Party to be seen as the party of the working man again, and the idea that we got beat by a blue-collar billionaire, that's not something that we can do. So these are things that we need to do to get the change in the American public's consciousness. But is the change legit? Or is the change just talk? Because right now, it's just talk. Now, talk matters. Don't misunderstand me. And sometimes talk in and of itself leads to this kind of expectation of consequences. But in this very specific instance, this is somebody who's trying to be a populace without a population. And it's the weirdest thing ever. Republicans seems defenseless. It's like they're shocked that the Democratic Party kind of went this route. Like, hey, He's talking about America. And our tax and spend language doesn't seem to be working. No, it's not working because nearly 1 million people drop dead. They went up in flames as a result of malfeasance in regards to the government. So yes, there's a certain degree of reparations that I think are due and that are understood due. So I don't think that, oh, they're spending so much money. Oh, the taxes. Oh. And what's wild about it, Joe Biden said, hey, you're right. You're right. I mean, I'm going to spend a lot of money, so I'm going to tax you for it. And they're like, whoa, what do you mean you're going to tax us for it? Hey, we got to pay for it, right? Well, yeah. Well, which one of these programs do you disagree with? Well, that's not infrastructure. Yeah. I get that. It's human infrastructure. Yeah, but I get that. But what do you disagree with? And that's when you get the brass tacks. And that's where you had a problem. Because in real terms, if you're going to disagree with any of this, the American public is going to look at you a particular way. It's not just about bridges. It's also about the human beings that make those bridges. Not just about air quality. It's about the human beings that make sure that air quality is intact. Whether your kids are being taught, whether the air quality is being kept, whether it's somebody who's the haberdasher, the shoemaker, the cup pour, or the coffee pour, all of these people are instrumental in regards to making our society, and all of these people deserve to be kept whole, especially if they're willing to work a decent job or a job in all. Joe Biden, populist without a populace. Shane, what do you think about this? And this is working. I think that's the sick part about this. It's like a timid warrior. And the opposition is like, he's like 1.9 trillion and they're like school books. You know, it's like we're talking about cancel culture. And it's like, dude, we're talking about jobs and we're talking about wages, and you guys are, it's like, it's not meeting in a weird way. And my thought is, one or two things needs to happen. If they're going to keep that up, then they can't compete, and they're going to have to change as a result in order to just compete. Because there's no way they can keep just not talking about the issue in perpetuity. Something has to change, and I think it has to be them. Could be wrong.
I think that that Biden and company have created a show. They've created like the narrative that they want to get across. They know roughly how they want to be perceived. And, you know, so if you think about a radio play or a sitcom or a TV show or whatever, something that is manufactured to try to get the public to take some action, you can see that happening. But simultaneously, and this is how these kinds of things work with the political establishment, Biden has distanced himself and his team from reality because they've had to invent a reality. And what they've also had to invent is an audience.
Yes.
They've had to invent in their mind, who are they responding to? What electorate are they responding to? And, you know, this is practically a thing that you would be doing as a politician. You'd have some mental model of who put you into office, what they want, and how you're supposed to respond to them in some way. That's a pretty simple thing, but that's in some sense your job as their representative is literally come up with a model of these people and enact their preferences in the halls of the White House and in the halls of Congress, get what they want done. That's what your job is as a politician. The problem with this is that I don't know that his model goes far enough. Pretty simply, I don't think that he thinks that Americans are as ambitious or progressive, frankly, as you do, Jamarl. I think that you think that people want more. I think that, and I think
you think he thinks people want less, and that he'd be punished for doing more.
I'm having to guess so. Yes, I think that is basically the thing. He's a little bit more conservative about this stuff than you are, and he might be right. Critically, there's a chance that if you ask the random person, do you want $15 an hour or do you want health care, they would say yes immediately. But if you ask them some of the other slightly more controversial provisions, or if you ask them in an abstract sense, do you want to have a larger government, that kind of thing, I could see people pushing back on that.
See, government, it's so abstract. Like, that's like massively abstract. It's very, the size of government is less important than what you need government to do. If you said, hey, do you need $15 an hour, and the person says yes, that's concrete. That's very specific. If you said, do you want to change? See, it gets difficult when you get into stuff like, okay, income inequality is bad. Okay, great. What do you want to do about it? Well, anything that you do about it, by definition, changes the dynamic of who owns what even if it's by some measure, and everybody's hair goes on end the moment that you say, do anything like that, right? Like, it doesn't matter what it is. It's like, let's increase taxes to maximum wage. What? You're going to have a maximum wage? Everyone's against everything that this country believes in to do anything about that. And yet it talks about it. It's very, very weird.
Well, I mean, another silence, another part of the silence that you're noticing here, I think, is that people are pretty sad. A lot of people are just pretty satisfied and at this point complacent because Trump is out of the office. If you remember all of the people, and you probably have known some of them yourself if you're listening to this, all of the I'm a little bit more on the line about Trump because I don't like his foreign. I mean, I prefer his foreign policy to Biden's foreign policy, but a lot of his domestic stuff has serious issues. There's a lot to make fun of and deride there anyway. But if you think of those people who are really anti-Trump, like not just never Trumpers in the conservative sense, but like on the liberal side, calling him Hitler, calling him all of these things, the fear and the feeling while he was president, the fear that he was going to take away, for instance, access to birth control, or that he was going to immediately roll back gay rights and the prospect of gay marriage. He was basically going to drive a theological revolution or something like that. All of these things were floating around in the atmosphere in 2016 and 2017 as concerns. You may remember this, Jamarl. People getting seriously freaked out.
Massively freaked out.
And for a lot of people, they were freaked out continuously there for years.
Hillary's book was named Shattered. To put it in perspective.
Yes.
Shattered.
Yes.
She had like a 90-something% chance of winning the night she lost.
And if I take those people if I take the people who had that, who felt that fear for years, literally, at their word, and say, okay, you guys, this is not just, and I'm not trying to be too derogatory here, but you guys, this isn't just posturing. You actually hate Donald Trump this much, and this is this much agony for you, and you're acting it out. Yeah. Like, you're playing it up a little bit, it feels to me, but I can see maybe there's some conviction in there. If I take them at their word, then they're just glad that's over. Yeah. They're just like really satisfied with Biden. Exactly, a long breath. Right. Yeah, they get to take a long breath. So if I take them at their word, it's no wonder that Biden is able to do effectively whatever he wants to do, as long as that trend continues and we continue to, we don't have to adjust our pillow.
And the media gives them a pass.
Keep our nap going. Yeah.
And as long as they give them a pass, it's going to go. I mean, that's the other catch. Like, the media is not, like, they're being very uncritical of him, with the exception of maybe immigration. But again, it's the Trump stuff, I think. I mean, I really do think it's that great exhale. That's what we're going to call it. The great exhale.
Yes. And they would be satisfied with that term too. If you were joking around with them a little bit, they were like, you just feel like you can take a breath now. They'd be like, yes, you get it. You understand. Right. I don't. I just noticed this eerie silence. I noticed that there are echoes going around in ways they shouldn't be. Yeah. And there is actual news. And you could be pushing Biden more, and you could be looking at the situation in the States and being pretty seriously critical, but the media seems happy and complacent, and I guess they want us to be too.
I think they're so happy that Trump is gone that I think it's that.
Yeah.
So, look, you guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back with the situation on the ground in, Palestine, back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my indispensable co-host, Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. I was horrified yesterday by what I was seeing in regards to scenes and images coming out of Palestine. Basically, people being pushed out of the mosque, and I'm going to mispronounce, I get the pronunciation of this wrong, but Aqsa Mosque. People praying. Now, basically, a lot of this started basically from the not the deportations, but the removal from the houses. Basically, Israel was trying to settle up and take the land in a particular area. And in this particular neighborhood, the people and the residents were obviously bothered by the fact that they were their land was being stolen. And the mosque, third holiest site or one of the holiest sites, is being basically defaced by soldiers. I'm seeing stun grenades dropped into crowds. And Ned Price having a conversation about this notion of self-defense and who has the right to self-defense. Meaning, do I have a right to self-defense for my own house? That if you're coming to my house, do I have the right to say, no, you shouldn't be able to take my house, and not just not be able to take my house, I should be able to defend myself and my house. Now, the catch becomes, who has the dispensation of force, or can dispense the most force? And therein lies the rub. Because you can defend your house all you want, but you're going to lose your life doing it. And multiple people lost their lives over the course of yesterday. And honestly, airstrikes and the way that the media talks about this and whitewashes this with this notion of these guys were clashing. Well, one guy has airstrikes. The other guy has rockets. And you're acting as if these things are parallels in regards to power. They are not. To have a conversation about this, we're joined with Leif Maruth, I'm sorry. He is an award-winning multimedia producer and broadcasting law consultant. Leif, thank you for joining us again, man. I appreciate this.
Thank you very much, guys.
I want to play this clip from Ned Price, and I want you to listen to what he's saying on this notion of self-defense and who has the right to self-defense, and listen to how, rabidly Israeli he is in this clip. Let's play the clip.
We're speaking of the principle of self-defense.
I'm asking if you think that the principle of self-defense applies to the retaliatory, the airstrikes that they're conducting in response.
Matt, this is a very fluid situation. I would hesitate to comment on operations beyond, the rocket fire that is clearly targeting innocent civilians in Israel. So I would hesitate to speak to specific operations that have just occurred. But the broader principle of self-defense is something we stand by on behalf of Israel and every other country.
Do you think that an Israeli military response to the rockets coming in, a military response to the rockets coming in is covered by this broader rubric of self-defense, right?
Self-defense often does authorize the use of force.
Thank you, Matt. I want to ask you about East Jerusalem, but let's talk about what you said about the principle of self-defense. Does that in any way apply to the Palestinians? Do they have a right to self-defense? Do Palestinians have a right to self-defense?
Broadly speaking, Saeed, we believe in the concept of self-defense. We believe it applies to any state. I don't think that. I certainly wouldn't want my words to be construed as.
I understand. I want to ask you. I don't want to harp on this either, but the Israelis killed 13 people just now, including maybe 5 or 6 children. Do you condemn that? Do you condemn the killing of children?
Saeed,
I'm asking you, do you condemn the killing of Palestinian children?
Obviously, and these reports are just emerging, and I understand, I was just speaking to the team, I understand we don't have independent confirmation of facts on the ground yet, so I'm very hesitant to get into reports that are just emerging.
Let's stop right there for a
obviously,
moment.
the deaths of civilians.
Notice how hardcore he was in the beginning. We believe in self-defense. We believe in self-defense. Do you believe in this defense of Palestinian children? Well, look, we have to find the facts on the ground. It's fluid. Just think, all of these years, the United States has pretended as if it was doing this. Okay, we're working on two sides, working on a peace deal, it's even. Yes, we're giving them billions. Yes, we're looking the other way from the standpoint of the nuclear weapons. Yeah, this was never even. This was never fair. There seemed to always be this difference in regards to the way life is regarded from the Palestinian point versus the Israeli point. What has taken place on the ground recently last night? There was a fire? The mosque itself caught on fire, and then there was cheering as it was burning. Laith.
Look, last night the Israeli occupation forces invaded the mosque again. This happened after the Jewish white supremacist fanatics that were supposed to march through Old Jerusalem and invade the mosque. They do that every year, and they were not able to do that because of the resistance of the Palestinians that were staying inside the mosque to protect it. So what did the Israeli occupation troops did? Eventually, they invaded the mosques themselves at the middle of the night and set one of the trees on fire. Those Jewish white supremacist fanatics were converging outside the mosque, and they had a huge dance and chants of death to Arabs and let it burn and such. And so this is the reality of what's happening.
Hang on a second. Laith, you're saying that there were chants of death to Arabs and people dancing outside of the mosque while it was burning? That is?
Yes, exactly. It's all on video. Everybody watched it. It's a disgusting display of hate. I imagine that let's say somebody goes into a synagogue in the United States, burns it, and then people converge around it and start dancing and film themselves proudly dancing and singing about it. And of course, it would have been a #1 headline story around all of the West, because there is a separate category that Jewish people seem to have been granted in the Western media. So that happened. Palestinian citizens of apartheid Israel, those who remained after 1948, the 25% of the Palestinians that became citizens, they're second-class citizens, were demonstrating all across their towns and villages. There was at least 40 towns and villages, demonstrating huge confrontations with Israeli occupation troops. One of the colonists in Al-Lid shot at 2 demonstrators, killing one of them and injuring another, which resulted in huge confrontations in Al-Lid between the Palestinian citizens and the Israeli police. Eventually, the citizens of Al-Lid took over the police station, something like what had happened in some of the American cities last year with the Black Lives Matter. So today there's calls for at least 50 demonstrations in different towns inside what is the Green Line, the territories that Israel occupied in 1948. There was even demonstrations in the Golan Heights yesterday. And of course, the Palestinian resistance in Gaza has been engaging militarily the Israeli occupation.
Let me ask you this. From the standpoint of, is the reason that this is taking off in the way that this is taking off and escalating, does it have to do with what seems to be the other Arab nations basically taking Israel's, in these kind of, what is it, I forget the name of the treaty, but basically
the normalization.
Yeah, the normalization of ties with Israel. I mean, basically they've left Palestine in the lurch, left to its own devices. It makes it seem like it's isolated and by itself. From your standpoint, when you make the argument about one person, one vote, do you think that would really work? I mean, for example, Israel will argue, well, we have security concerns, that we don't believe that we can do one person, one vote because that's no longer Israel. Or we don't believe that we will be safe in that situation. Do you agree with that? Or, it's like, no, this is something that can be done. One person, one vote is something that can take place in regards to a viable plan forward.
Yes, I mean, look at South Africa. We had one person, one vote. And what had happened is that those white colonists in South Africa that couldn't accept equality with the black people, that wanted to maintain their privilege above those people, actually moved to Canada and the United States and Australia, where they could continue to be feeling supreme to the indigenous people and feel safe with their whiteness. So that's what exactly would happen in Palestine if there's one person, one vote. A chunk of the Israeli colonists will accept equality and they will stay. Probably most of them would be religious, ultra-Orthodox and anti-Zionists. And the rest of them will go to New York and Toronto and London, where they can continue to feel superior to others. So that's the reality. And the other thing that I want to say in terms of the Arab states, look, since 1948, there was very few Arab states that actually supported the Palestinian people. And when we're looking at those who, the states that are normalizing right now, these are the monarchies that are vessels that never actually went through a decolonization process. So in 1948, when you hear the Zionists brag about taking on all the Arabs, every Arab state was still under occupation in 1948 except Syria, who just escaped the French occupation 2 years before that and had World War I rifles and homemade arrows and swords. So in reality, today, the Palestinian people, for the first time in 70-somewhat years, have sufficient enough power militarily to defend themselves without having to even wait for some vessel king in Saudi or Morocco to show them any support. We don't need that support. And in fact, when we heard the spokesperson of the United States government that you just played the audio. You know what? I don't care what the United States thinks as a government. The Palestinian people and every people in the world who are under occupation have the guaranteed right under the Geneva Convention that came out as a result of the Holocaust and World War II to resist their occupier in any means necessary that they find necessary, including armed struggle. So the Palestinian people have the right to kill every Israeli if that's what it takes to end the occupation, and that's their guaranteed right under the Geneva Convention and the United Nations.
Laith, isn't that too pitted of a battle? You're talking about okay, so if you're saying that technically there's a right to strike back against an oppressive hand that is keeping you down, whether there's a moral right or enshrined in the Geneva Conventions a legal right, I can understand the case broadly for that kind of thing. But if you're talking about the right to retribution against every Israeli citizen, that seems like that is going to set you up for a pitted, bloody, frankly, never-ending war. Because unless there's some kind, I don't know, my feeling is that unless there's some kind of peaceful resolution, whatever that looks like, as long as that process can come to a compromise, you're going to be able to make some ground there. But if what it turns into is a massacre, even if it feels justified, I don't see that ending well. And if that's the approach, if that's the perspective going into it, that seems like that's setting you up for a long, bloody battle. But what's your take on that, Leif?
So it's now been 100 years of a long, bloody battle, which is mainly Palestinian blood and Arab blood that has been spilled at the altar of Western imperialism. And so, for instance, we look on the last 24 hours. The Palestinian resistance in Gaza began firing rockets on apartheid Israel. Israel responded, killing 20-somewhat civilians, 9 of them children. Up until now, there's not one Israeli civilian killed. So the truth of the matter is that the apartheid Israel, backed by the West, are committing genocide of the Palestinians, either fast in the way that they killed all those demonstrators last year at the Right of Return demonstrations, the unarmed demonstrators that they shot and sniped and laughed about it, and or slowly through the expulsions and land confiscations and so forth.
Yeah, I don't think the issue is not necessarily moral justification. I think the issue is that there's no cosmic God to weigh it, put its finger on the scale to ensure that moral justification translates into a victory. I think that's the point.
So look, so what I'm trying to say here is that the Palestinian people have tried and are continuing to do nonviolent resistance, call for democracy, call for one person, one vote, even saying, those who Zionist colonists who want to stay, they can stay and be equal. But, none of that actually matters in the long run, other than being a PR campaign, because the reality is the United States and its vassal apartheid Israel, they don't care if you don't have the power to force them to do so, to give you your rights. And
balance
you
of
know,
power is
rights
changing.
are not given.
But the thing is, Laith, like we talked about, I believe yesterday when we spoke with you about this issue. Again, a lot has happened, so it's good to talk to you again. Good to have you back on. But the balance of power seems to be shifting pretty dramatically. And if the United States is fading in the region, and if China and Russia are, their influence in the region is growing, the assumption is they're not going to take the same perspective on Israel or what it's doing with the Palestinians. And in general, in trying to open up the Middle East for trade with China specifically, it seems like they have a pretty strong incentive to get this situation worked out. Whether it's to the satisfaction of every party involved, that's pretty doubtful, but to get the situation in the Middle East broadly stable for the purposes of conducting trade, that whole thing, that seems like that would be the Chinese approach coming into power. So you could have a decade or two, but it sounds like that would be the way that this shifts. That would be the way that this changes. There are these larger tectonic forces coming in and realigning things. That seems like how you're actually going to get some long-term difference in this setup. Laith, we need to go to a break, but any quick comment there before we close?
Yes, I mean, you're fully right. The empire is of the United States, the sun is setting on it, and the first things that will go are its vessels at the peripheries of the empire, like apartheid Israel, like Saudi-occupied Arabia.
I see that happening as in some form or another. I do believe that Israel would continue to exist. But what that looks like, whether it's one person, one vote, exactly how that happens, that's a much larger question. We got to close here, though. Laith, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, for those listening, that was Laith Marouf, award-winning multimedia producer and broadcasting law consultant. You can follow Laith on Twitter at Laith Marouf. And you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're going into a break, taking your calls when we come back. 202-521-1320 for about 5-6 minutes on the other side of this short break. Be right back.
Fault Lines.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines. We divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today, get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and dig straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we are back taking your calls, 202-521-1320. Again, that number is 202-521-1320. We're taking your calls. It is a bit early in the morning. Good conversation with Laith. And by the way, while I have you here, quick preview of the show to come. From 8:15 to 8:45, we will be speaking with John Kiriakou about the upcoming presidential elections in Iran, about Rouhani saying that the U.S. will lift sanctions, and about Saudi Arabia's relationship with Iran. At 8:45, we're planning on speaking with Chris Smalls, the pioneering Amazon unionization dude. Again, this is from 8:45 to 9 a.m. Eastern, activist and organizer Chris Smalls. And then from 9:15 to 9:45 a.m. Eastern, we're planning on speaking with Kim Iverson, YouTuber, former radio show host, and ongoing independent journalist and host of the Kim Iverson Show on YouTube. We're going to be talking about Joe Biden, Simone Sanders, and sort of revisiting the topic that we opened the show up with about populism, populist without populism. It was, Jamarl, one way you put that in, where, populism without a public or something like this. That conversation about the weird kind of quasi-populist economic behavior that Biden is engaging in.
Yeah.
That he's known for. That seems to be his thing.
Very weird. Puff of smoke. And yet, populist. Like, that's what, I mean, Republicans keep saying, oh, he's like Bernie Sanders. It's like, no, he's not like Bernie Sanders. But you know what they're getting at when they're saying that. By the same token, he doesn't have a crowd. There's not 10, 15,000 people out there screaming his name. That's not that. And so it's a very weird phenomena that's taking place around him.
We got 3 callers.
Oh, wow.
And we only have enough time for maybe 2 of them, but I will try. We have Michael calling in from Sydney. Michael, you're on first. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi guys. First, I'd like to pick up on what you were just talking about. I mean, Biden didn't fulfill his primary 3 campaign goals, which was Medicare for all, also $15 minimum wage, and also student loan forgiveness. So he's not really a populist. He's just doing what the elites will let him do to keep the public happy enough not to rise up and chop off their heads. In terms of what the previous guests talking about Israel, I think it's time we all face facts. Israel is at best it's ethnic cleansing, at worst it's genocide. The EU's come out against them. America is sort of turning more and more neutral on the subject. The General Assembly is definitely against them. The General Assembly has approved every resolution against Israel since its inception. They're in violation of numerous treaties, including the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. If this was any other state other than Israel, then they would be under many sanctions and embargoes from the US. They are an apartheid state. It is Palestine. It was Palestine before the First World War. It was Palestine before the Second World War. They divided up after the Second World War and created Israel. And I believe in what Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, the previous president of Iran, said. If these, and I do believe they were committed, these atrocities were committed against the Jews in Europe. They definitely were committed. Then why isn't Israel a state in Germany, in Europe? Why aren't Israelis oppressing Germans who oppress them? Why are they oppressing Palestinians who fought on the side of the Allies in the Second World War to defeat the Germans?
Yeah, extremely good point. Just because an atrocity happens to you doesn't justify you committed an atrocity to somebody else.
Well, and it's also the location, is where you're choosing your state. And again, right. I mean, they chose it there. You can go back to the Balfour Declaration. But it seems like a way to deal with the colonial legacy of Britain, frankly. Maintaining a sort of grip in the region, dealing with what could locally be a problem. That the creation of, that's how I see that in a weird way, is the extension of, Western influence in a region that was going through decolonization over the sort of decades-long period. We got another caller, Jamarl. Any other thoughts there?
Well, just to be clear, Biden didn't promise Medicare for all. He public option. He did say $15 an hour minimum wage. Those were the 2.
All right. We got Brave calling from Atlanta. Brave, in about a minute here. What's on your mind?
Hey, what's up? I would have preferred to have waited till later, but I just after the last segment, I had to call. Let me just say first, reasonably, I agree with you the points you were making, Shane, concerning Lake's segment. However, it's not a reasonable situation, right? So the people can't wait for the fall of the empire, the hope for the fall of the empire, or the hope that China will do better. People have to fight now, and that's why. And they're well within. I mean, not that you say they're not well. I'm not arguing that you disagree with them fighting for their survival, but this is the rational mind, the reasonable mind, the philosophical mind that I think to a certain extent is why liberals and independents don't seem to be getting anything done in the American politics stance, because we are too high-minded, we are too rational, we are too reasonable. Someone has a gun in your face and they're killing your family and your friends and everyone around you. There is no more time to plot to when we can do this, when we can do that. It is a point of survival. So
Brave, I hear you. We've got to close this one out. Feel free to. I'd be happy if you want to call back in at the end of the show. I would take your call if you wanted to call back. But I hear you, and yeah, that is. If I were to speak to a drowning person and tell them to calm down, stop panicking, whether I'm right or I'm wrong, they're going to have a hard time listening to me.
Unsatisfying. Yeah.
It's going to be completely, they're going through their own thing. I can't understand it. And I'm not trying to pass that question off as if, frankly, they had any ability to coordinate their efforts to respond to it in that way, the Palestinians specifically. They're just doing what they're doing. We got to close this segment out, though. Close this hour out. We'll be back in a minute with headlines and the last 2 hours of today's show. Be right back.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, precipitously perched at the edge of this resilient and exploited globe. Welcome to your contact lens for the American perspective. In the left corner, I'm your ever-vigilant, your indefatigable political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Jane Stranahan.
That would strongly imply that you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
One quick thing, just Jamarl, I know you're getting into the headlines here, but I just really brief comment. I realize if somebody's just watching the video, okay, they're watching, we're watching the video, you're sitting on the left side of the table, you say, I'm in the left corner. Then it goes to me, and I say, I'm in the independent corner. If you're watching that video, what makes this corner independent? This is just the right corner of the table. But I don't want to get the wrong idea across politically, because I do consider myself independent. So
You'd have to sit down there somewhere.
I'd have to sit down there, exactly. I'd have to be independent of this corner just to be really independent in my corner. Anyway, that was my important news update.
No worries. Great segment, by the way. And look, just to comment real quick on Brave. Look, he has a point. I mean, we were sitting here before you even called in, it was like, yeah, it's unsatisfying. Like the answer is always going to be unsatisfying. If I'm engaging you and somebody is killing your family or something like that, or your home is being stolen, there's two realities, and there's multiple realities. On one level, you're right. That this is not going to be something, a force of arms that you yourself may be able to carry out yourself. By the same token, a force of arms may allow other opportunities, but you may lose that. Like there's no cosmic, Britain put down a lot of colonies, that uprose. It wasn't because they were right in doing so from the standpoint of human rights or anything like that. It's just they had the force of arms. And so it's like, it's not as simple as a satisfying. I always compare what takes place in Israel and Palestine to the African-American experience. And I know they're not entirely different, but on some level they are very similar, especially in the standpoint of the way the second-class citizenship thing is set up. And so it's like, you have your family hung. Okay, what do you do about it? Do you respond to it? Like we had one of our family members, guy was picked up at like 2, 3 in the morning, taken out, never seen again. Basically, they took him on and hung him. It's like, so what does the family do? The family's angry. The family is indignant. But what do you do about it? And you take this on, you do this all across the country, especially in certain areas of the South, and you get this anger, this vitriol. But that anger and vitriol is not coming out of nowhere. It's coming as a result of the actions and environments. And so it's like the same thing is true there. And I've had conversations with people who are who's Belgian Palestinian, and she was like, well, they should open the gates. And it's like, yeah, but if you open the gates, they just had a bomb go off. And it's like, yeah, but still, that wouldn't be an issue. I said, but certainly you have to take into account their security concerns, even if you try to make headway in regards to trying to the peace thing. And it's just a very difficult way to move forward. What I do know is that the killing of those people at the, it's so over the top. It's an open air ghetto, and they set bombs. I remember in the last incursion, they would set a bomb to go off to alert the people that a bigger bomb was coming. Like it was stuff like that. Like it was like dumb bombs that was landing in the various areas. Yeah, it's disturbing. That's all. And so I'm glad Leah could come on. But there are two things that I think got across: is passion, and how that passion, honestly, is not tethered to. How can I say this? It's tethered to reality, but it's not tethered in the sense of, okay, this is a conflict we can win. It's a conflict we just need to fight back. The winning is secondary, if that makes sense. Like, because Israel has nuclear weapons. They have tanks. They have all of these guns and everything else. They have fighter jets. these guys have rockets. And so it's like they're not going to start a war, regardless of the fact that the papers are going to count it as a war. You can have 3 rockets fired, and the New York Times will say, a war fought between Palestine and Israel.
I hear you.
They would do that nonsense.
How the hell would they strike Palestine with nuclear
No,
weapons?
I'm not saying they're going to.
That would not. They would not. You would be shooting yourself in the foot.
I'm not saying they're going to nuke them, but
No.
I'm trying to get the point across of the different levels of technological capability in regards to power. No, it's not about winning at that point. It's about just the strike back. But let's get to the headlines. In the news, more than 36,450 new COVID cases were reported in the United States yesterday, with just under 370 new deaths. Over the past week, there's been an average of 39,124 new cases per day, a decrease of 29% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 35% of the American public has been fully vaccinated, and 46% of residents have received at least 1 dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected more than 32,772,514 people across the United States and has killed 581,669 human beings. The Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine has been approved for teens aged 12 to 15, with the drug maker Pfizer also looking to expand the ages of those who could be treated, kids aged 11 and under. In national news, President Biden has said that Russia is not responsible for the attack on the Colonial Pipeline, saying the Russian government, however, has, quote, some responsibility to deal with, quote, a Russian cyber criminal gang that the United States is accused of the attack. Looking outside of our borders, at least 7 students were shot and killed during school shooting in the city of Kazan in Russia as a 19-year-old who had attended the school opened fire. 11 said to have been killed, with over a dozen others hospitalized or wounded. Israel and Palestine both began openly warring as Israelis celebrated Jerusalem Day, a celebratory holiday marking Israel's taking of East Jerusalem in the Arab-Israeli War of 1967. Hamas threatened to launch rockets if Israel did not withdraw. The official figures from China show a slowing birth rate, 1.41 billion people, which is an increase of just over 0.5% from 2010. 3 journalists and 2 activists who fled to Thailand from Myanmar, are being put on charges of illegally entering the country, will be returned if convicted. Registration has begun for Iran's presidential election next month. Current President Hassan Rouhani cannot join the race as he has already served 2 terms. Those are your headlines. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. So the Rouhani one's interesting. So there's a question of who was going to take power in Iran, and we're going to probably get into that with John Kiriakou. But this notion of the JCPOA and whether or not the JCPOA, because of the push that took place under the Trump administration, whether that will inspire hardliners to take power in the upcoming election, especially with Rouhani not being able to necessarily run in this next election. It's going to be interesting to see how that works out. The JCPOA, though, I had made the point that said, Joe Biden, there is nothing outside of the JCPOA for the United States. Nothing at all. And what I meant by that is that if right now Iran said, we are going to increase our centrifuges to 99%, what is the United States going to do at this moment? What is Israel going to do? Are they going to do a strike? Is the United States going to do a strike? Is that what Joe Biden actually wants? To have a military strike with Iran at this point? Have an open war declared with Iran? I don't think that's what he wants. And because I don't think that's what he wants, it's the brinksmanship thing that was taking place between Iran and Trump. Neither side wanted a war. Both sides knew that neither side wanted a war. So there was a certain level of brinksmanship that could take place on this notion of, okay, I'm going to take an act. And I'm going to take this act knowing that this person doesn't want to escalate to the point of war. This person takes an act. This person is taking an act knowing that the other side doesn't want to escalate to the point of war. And they estimate how far they can go within the context of not initiating heavier action. So Donald Trump murders Soleimani. Now, this is radically bad. From the standpoint of Iran, Iran attacks a military base. Now, Trump says, I was about to put the planes in the air, but think about what's happening here. This is out of control at this point. At each point, one of the leaders has to pull back, and the leader that pulls back on some level loses face in the process. And Trump pulls back at the last minute, because what Trump understood was that the moment that that plane launched, it was out of his hands. It was entirely and completely out of his control in regards to what happened. Everything that took place from the standpoint of Trump pulling out of the JCPOA was the United States pulling out of that deal. That was all of these other countries agreed and says, yes, we will honor this particular deal. The sad part is the moment that the United States pulled out of the deal, I kept saying it's not going to be long before the rest of the world starts saying that it's Iran's responsibility to come back to the deal. And lo and behold, what happens? The way Jen Psaki talks about it, the way Joe Biden talks about it, the way the media talks about it. Hey, when is Iran going to come back to the deal? It's not Iran to come back to the deal. We pulled out. We worked to kill some of their people. We worked to put drones. We worked for the pressure strategy. We sent ships over to that part of the world. We did all of those things. So how is it Iran to come back to the deal? The reality of it is there is nothing, no space for the United States to exist outside of the JCPOA. Biden doesn't want to be called weak, despite the fact that it is clearly understood that the JCPOA at this point, or at the very least Biden believes pulling out of that deal, was a mistake. So we have, at this point, Rouhani basically saying, yes, Joe Biden will come back to that deal. Now, whether Joe Biden comes back to the deal today, tomorrow, who knows? But the negotiations that were taking place have boiled down to this notion that, yes, there will be a renewal of the JCPOA. At least that's what's coming down on the grapevine. But again, the reason is important to understand. The whole point of the JCPOA was supposedly to prevent a war between the United States and Iran. And so pulling out of the JCPOA increases the hysteria on that. When Iran starts increasing their centrifuge capacity, well, the reason they're doing it is across two reasons, or two things. One, you can't do anything about this. And two, you said you don't want a war. And if you don't necessarily want a war, then the deal is the only place that you need to be for us to meet in the middle. And to get back to that deal, you need to take sanctions off. And no, they're non-negotiable. So it's really interesting, Shane. And then you get to this other notion of like Saudi Arabia, where all of a sudden you hear their peace talks. And you wonder whether the peace talks are completely and directly related to A, the U.S. pulling out of Afghanistan, supposedly, where the JCPOA is being enacted, with Saudi Arabia, who, sixth most expensive military in the world, but couldn't be the band of rebels in Yemen. And so it's like, with the United States pulling out, well, you don't have your big buddy here, your big brother here, to threaten this other country. So does that make them more inclined to go in regards to peace talks? Like, I think all of these things are interrelated on some level. What are your thoughts?
Yes. Yeah, but I also just came back from the bathroom, and so I may have missed some of where you're
like, so I'm going to agree.
Going with this. Yeah. No, everything that I heard made sense, absolutely.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, it's very wild. I mean, the way that these guys have been willing, like, for example, we've been willing to kill people in that country after this deal, under the idea that the JCPOA was, a horrible deal and everything else. And now, all right, let's just pretend nothing happened. Let's go back to the deal. It just seems off or something. Like it's like how do you accept? Like, will we accept the killing of John Kerry within the context of a deal? Let's say there was a deal, there was a peace deal. John Kerry goes to a particular country. There's a drone strike. John Kerry dies. We know this other country did it. The other country bragged. They even took a poll. The half of the country says, yes, we think it was a fair killing, perfectly legit. How would we take that? And was there any situation where we'd be like, okay, let's agree to a deal now? I don't think so. I mean, I don't know. It's just, I mean, some of these things are country negotiation between countries. So fair enough. And some of these things where you can't let the emotion part get involved, fair enough. But looking at the response when he was killed, it just seemed huge. That's all.
Well, and maybe another way of looking at this is it shouldn't be understated how seriously Trump screwed this one up in a couple of key ways. Not only by pulling out of the JCPOA, but with the assassination of Soleimani, that was obviously on the American side.
Right.
But this has come as, the Saudis, and just a couple of days after Soleimani was assassinated, reportedly took down that plane accidentally, basically. I believe it was the Ukrainian flight that they shot down and then denied, and then that denial was walked back, and they apologized for it, if I'm remembering this whole process of, this series of events. This is heightened, tensions have heightened a bit with Iran in the last couple of years due to what Trump specifically did. And so if I can make that argument that Trump screwed this up and that the best thing for the states would be to get back into the JCPOA, well, surely Biden could too.
Yeah.
Biden could say that kind of thing to the public and to Iran, that it, is critical in the strongest senses of the decisions made by the Trump administration, that Biden wants to make it clear he is changing American policy, he's changing the direction, and he wants to get back into the deal with Iran. I'm pretty sure they would go with that.
Yeah.
If he were to do that, drop sanctions and all that stuff. What's happening now is a little bit weirder, because if we're coming back to that, but we're not dropping our sanctions, Biden is pretty tacitly and directly, de facto, criticizing Obama again. If you're hesitant to come back to the deal, why would you do? I guess you want to buy time. You could be doing that because you want to buy time for some reason. You could be doing that because you want to maintain, for whatever, economic purposes.
I think the
conflict with Iran.
They don't want to make it look like the United States is running back to the deal. Like, oh my God, thank you for taking us back. I think it's that, and they don't want to be attacked for that. Like when Obama gave Iran the money back, for example.
Yeah.
And what did the Republicans say? Oh, he sent all of this money to Iran. He's blood money to our. It's that stuff. It can never be done in honest terms. You know what I mean?
I hear you, but that in its own way, that's just dreadful. It's like you don't want to make such a big deal out of wanting to get back into the deal. You sort of want to diss them, and so you just kind of delay and push it off and act indifferent about it and critical of Iran, and make put all of the requirements for change on their end.
Yes.
We need to go to a break, and we're going to be continuing this conversation in its own way with our next guest, John Kiriakou, former CIA official and author. John Kiriakou. We'll be back with him in a minute. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be right back on the other side of this short break.
Fault Lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. So through the grapevine, as one would call it, Rouhani has said, we have reached a point, in this quote, we have reached a point where both Americans and the Europeans openly declare they have no choice but to lift sanctions and return to the nuclear pact, said Rouhani in a speech late on Saturday. The lifting of the sanctions was one of 4 red lines of negotiations in Vienna and a precondition for the Iranian side to sit down and talk directly with the U.S. counterpart, something both hope to achieve before June 8th, when the president elections take place in Iran. Now, they are basically doing a kind of behind-the-scenes confirmation by lower-ranking officials that the United States is agreeing to lift sanctions in order to get back to the JCPOA. Now, in order to have a conversation about this, we're joined with John Kiriakou. He's former CIA officer, co-host of The Backstory on Radio Sputnik, and author of the books The CIA Insider's Guide to Iran Crisis and The Reluctant Spy. John, welcome to the show, man. Thank you for joining us.
Good to do it.
Absolutely.
Good to talk to you both.
So the sanctions thing, you were the first person I thought of when this subject came up, because it makes sense. To me, I thought they had to get back to the JCPOA. There was nowhere else from the standpoint of the political, wasteland outside of the JCPOA, because the JCPOA was the thing that was supposed to stop a nuclear war. So from your standpoint, why, so from your standpoint, in regards to this deal, supposedly this is secretive, or this is something behind the scenes, but what, from your standpoint, from your point of view, was going on behind the scenes in regards to these negotiations? Was this a face-saving measure? Was there something else going on here that we're just not necessarily seeing as lay people looking at this?
I think so. And I think what it is that the Biden administration absolutely has to look tough in these negotiations. Now, we all know what the negotiations are going to come down to. They're going to come down to what the original language was in the JCPOA, that the Iranians will give up their nuclear program, that they will subject the peaceful nuclear program, the nuclear energy program, to international inspection, et cetera, et cetera. Cameras at the facilities, the same kind of things that the United Nations did with Iraq. But then at the same time, for domestic political reasons, the Biden administration has to look tough. But the bottom line is the same, and we all know what the bottom line is. The bottom line is that we have to lift sanctions. And, so many American voters just are not willing to go along with that, because they've been propagandized for so many years to believe that the Iranians are our natural enemies and that we have to have sanctions on Iran in order to bring down the regime. So we're kind of stuck by our own rhetoric.
Well, but also, John, I'm curious, and thank you for joining us. I'm curious, do you think that there's a sort of I would have to guess so, but how much of this is the sort of public for domestic consumption criticism of Iran, need to push back against them, need to treat them as a, not just a adversary, but a threat and an active one? Yeah. That's the sort of public messaging, but I'm guessing that part of the private messaging is also simply resentment towards Iran for having started this nuclear program in the first place, for having created it as a bargaining chip and used it as such. And I could just see there being a sort of institutional resentment, anger, bitterness, that kind of thing, that kind of emotional attitude internally, and not just for realpolitik reasons, that it might inspire some of the action and some of the reticence, particularly in the Biden administration, to get back to the deal. What's your take on that, John?
I think you're absolutely right, Shane. Iran is a tough one for us because nobody really, you don't have these groups in government that are pro-Iranian like you do groups that are pro-Russian. Let's put our differences aside with the Russians, move on diplomatically. You never hear that in government, at the State Department or the Defense Department or the CIA, when talking about the Iranians. And then this recording of Rouhani talking last week or the week before Zarif, and complaining about the
I thought it was Zarif.
I'm sorry. Oh, yes, it was.
Foreign Minister Javad Zarif, I believe you're talking about.
That's right.
In the hot mic audio.
That's right, hot mic audio. He essentially said the same thing that Hillary Clinton said 10 years ago, that the problem with Iran is that it's a military dictatorship. It's not a democracy, because literally everything has to go through the IRGC and then through the supreme leader.
While we're on that, so, with the hot mic bit real quick, we spoke with another guest, but I also wanted to come back to it with you. One of our other guests, I believe it was Elijah Magnier, said that that Javad Zarif was releasing that for public consumption. That's where it was coming from. That's who leaked it.
Yep, that's what he thought.
Yep, that's what Michael
thought. That's what I thought too.
That's what Elijah thought. Yeah. And that, he was doing this. Why do you think he would have done this? What do you think, maybe just briefly restate what what was significant from his hot mic audio itself, from the leak? But also, why do you think he
yeah,
would do it, John?
To me, that was something of a pressure valve, and he was releasing some pressure. Because to me, the message was, look, our people are negotiating in good faith, but just like you have to answer to your political, domestic political constituents, we have our own political constituents here, and they're in the religious leadership and the military leadership. So I'm negotiating in good faith. Let's give this a chance and see where it goes. That was the message
this
that
is
I
the
got.
behind the scenes. Like,
Exactly.
It's not, I don't have full power in regards to the negotiations here. Here's what's going on behind the scenes that you guys can see it. I can't tell you this officially. So, oops, here's the leak that just so happens to come up. Very interesting.
And on the other side of this too, Joe Biden knows that he's going to have congressional support. Now, the administration's arguing that that whatever's negotiated does not have to go through the Senate for approval again. I think that's probably not true. And the Senate's divided 50-50. So he's got his own political situation to worry about, and he doesn't want to go hog wild and give the Iranians everything that they're asking for, which is why we're bogged down on sanctions right now, because he has to worry about the likes of Joe Manchin and Lisa Murkowski when this thing finally hits the Senate.
I actually want to come back to the Zarif thing for just a second here, John. I wanted to follow up on that because something stuck out to me, which is, isn't this a pretty mercenarial move in its own way from Zarif? Oh,
that's a good point.
Like, unless he's trying to affect, it seems like he just added fuel to the fire by saying that the IRGC is effectively in control, by saying, if not that it's a military dictatorship or anything like that, but that it is contra that, simply being aggressive and steered by internal and external forces to seek agitation and aggression. Isn't he kind of burning his own government, if that's the gist of what he's saying?
Yes. Yeah, that's a good point, Shane. And I think that unless this leak was authorized, and it may have been authorized, he was essentially burning his own government. We never, ever hear criticism of the IRGC, even indirectly like this, from civilian leaders.
That's what was odd to me about it. Yeah.
Yeah, highly unusual. Highly unusual, unless he was authorized to do it in order to pass a message to the United States.
Well, even the Soleimani bit, the notion that Soleimani was against the deal.
Yes.
Or that, like that part, even the Russians were supposedly against the deal because they didn't want to take the opportunity for having any, even if it was a small wisp of a link between the United States, because it may pull Russia away from, or Iran from away from the Russian orbit.
Absolutely.
Like it was a phenomenal leak. Like if you let all of that go, from the standpoint of Russia, on some level that makes sense. In a geopolitical standpoint, it goes beyond this notion of, okay, what's a peaceful world, into, well, we don't want that country to lose our relationship. And so it's like this kind of geopolitical gamesmanship that takes place. Everybody's on the deal on the outskirts of it, but internally there's their own internal politics. The sanctions and everything else. So you believe this is legit in regards to the leak, that the sanctions are being released, and that basically Biden is just trying to draw time out in order to basically, look, we didn't go running back to the deal. We negotiated. That negotiations turned out with XYZ. Both of us are going to save face and we're going to walk away. What is Joe Biden going to use to save face on this?
This is a tough one. I suppose Biden could sort of point the finger at the Europeans and say, for the JCPOA to work, we're going to have to fall back into line with what the Europeans are doing and what we had originally committed to do with Iranians when the JCPOA was first negotiated. And really that would get us back to where we were. That would get us back to the whole point of having a JCPOA in the first place. But then at the same time, domestically, he's going to face a lot of trouble on Capitol Hill and on the campaign trail. Can you imagine a single Republican advocating lifting sanctions on Iran, or a single Democrat even who's in a tight race in the off-year elections, admitting that we need to soften against the Iranians? And this is going to be very tough. So I think the reason why things are going so slowly right now is because Biden's trying to squeeze out a little bit more than what the JCPOA had originally called for, so that he can declare political victory and take some of the heat off Democrats running for re-election.
Why do you think that kind of anti-war pushback has so little currency in Washington right now? Just a broad question, but why do you think that has faded away? What caused that, John?
You know, Shane, I don't mean to sound cynical, but I think that post 9/11, we entered into what has become a permanent wartime economy. Our economy is based on, frankly, on its defense budget. And there are an awful lot of people in the Washington area who have gotten very, very rich since the 9/11 attacks. And our relations with Iran are part of that, where they're adversarial, they're based on a military buildup, and the JCPOA might seek to, or might cause that to be relieved a little bit. So, you know, there are a lot of people in the Washington area, a lot of very important and powerful people who don't want things to improve with Iran, because that's going to be money out of their pockets. Defense contractors, for example. And they like things just the way they are. The status quo works for them. The status quo has gotten them rich.
That's
and
very
so,
grim.
You know, where it may not be based on politics or policy, it's certainly based on money.
I want to jump for a moment to the Saudis. And so there's this interesting article that came out, and it was multiple, talking about peace overtures and conversations behind the scenes between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And I thought to myself, it's big. Well, I'll say it this way. I'll ask the question. The United States is supposedly pulling out of Afghanistan. The United States is supposedly trying to get back to the JCPOA. I don't think it's coincidental that Saudi Arabia is putting out peace overtures. Or is it coincidental? I mean, it seems that the U.S., with the shifting of focus to China, that lack of focus in the United States, in the Middle East, has caused a reappraisal of priorities.
Yeah.
What's going on here with this? I mean, I don't believe for a moment these things are unrelated.
Yeah, you're right. What's going on is the Saudis have just finally accepted the fact that Donald Trump has lost the presidency. And what I mean is they realize that Joe Biden is not Donald Trump. Joe Biden is not going to rally to their side every time they ask him to. Joe Biden is going to reach out to the Iranians to renegotiate the JCPOA. Joe Biden really is going to pull out of Afghanistan.
Wait, John, I'm sorry. I want to cut in kind of early here because this is just, it's striking me as quite weird. I thought that Biden was the figure who is going to extend more commitment to our allies overseas. That is how he's been pitching himself. Blinken, a sort of return to normal in terms of being more willing to support our allies around the world. That is the messaging. So why is Biden different in this case?
In general, yes, but there's no love between Biden and the Saudis. There never has been. And the fact that the Saudis so closely allied themselves with Donald Trump allows Joe Biden to make these kinds of moves. You know, the Saudis always want it both ways. They want us to protect them from Iran, but they just won't budge on relations with Israel. And so, you know, we're getting to this geopolitical point in time, not a political point, but a point in time, where the Saudis are going to be left behind. And that's why, for example, yesterday, the Emir of Qatar visited Saudi Arabia for the first time since he ascended to the throne. That's why the Saudis gave approval for Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates to open diplomatic relations with Iran, because they see events just sort of leaving them behind. Now, if they want to be protected against Iran by the United States, they're going to have to play ball. And so I think that's why we're seeing these policy changes.
How do you think the Abraham Accords and that whole process of opening these countries up, how much success do you think that had for Israel, for the United States? Was it what Trump painted it as?
This was a big victory for both Israel and the United States, and it was a huge loss for the Palestinians.
Yeah. John, one more layer I want to add on to that before I pass it to you real quick. What do you see the future of the Middle East in terms of its diplomatic processes? How central is that kind of thing to a desirable future in the Middle East as a region, John?
it depends on your political point of view. The peace process is dead. It's gone. There is no process ongoing right now. There is going to be no two-state solution. There are no negotiations. It's just finished. Right. At the same time, you have countries like literally waiting in line to open relations with Israel. The Moroccans have opened an embassy. The Bahrainis have opened an embassy. The Emiratis. I think soon we're going to see the Omanis and the Sudanese, perhaps even Kuwait. And so this is exactly what the Israelis have wanted since the 1940s. But then what do the Palestinians get out of it? Literally nothing.
Yeah.
Because that never entered into the equation with the Trump administration. The Trump administration didn't care about the Palestinians. They didn't care about the peace process. You know, this is funny to me, too, about how Jared Kushner was lauding this peace agreement. Well, it's not a peace agreement.
It didn't even include Palestinians.
They've never been at war with Israel, right? Morocco and Bahrain and the Emirates, these countries have never been at war with Israel, so how is it a peace agreement? What it is it's a diplomatic and trade agreement, and it screws the Palestinians at the same time.
What do you think about the power arrangement? Shane made this point before, and I think it's a really good point, with the shifting arrangements of power. Let's say with the United States, let's say waning and pulling itself and pivoting towards China, and you have, let's say, the Iran, Russia, China, creating this kind of block itself. Not to mention you had in Syria, North Korea, some of these other countries, or for that matter, just the Belt and Road Initiative in and of itself and the way the trade relationship goes. What happens in regard to the context of Israel and Palestine? It's true that all of those other countries basically sold Palestine out, but but Iran never did.
I think most Americans have no understanding of just what a major political shift this is in the Middle East. The Middle East was supposed to be our sole kingdom. You know, when I was a diplomat assigned in Bahrain, I was the economic officer there. The peace process was ongoing, and the Bahrainis were hosting the Middle East peace talks for the environment, right? So a delegation of Israelis came, and then diplomats from all over the Arab world came, and I was instructed. What I was supposed to do was to go to the foreign ministry with my Russian counterpart and issue the formal invitation for the Bahrainis. But the State Department instructed me to go without the Russian. And when I wrote back and I said, but this is a joint effort, I'm supposed to, go to the Russian embassy, pick him up, and literally physically go to the foreign ministry with him. They said, no, we got to cut the Russians out of this, and then just apologize later. And so that's what I did. I went to the foreign ministry by myself, issued the invitation. The Russian was absolutely livid. I said I was sorry. I took him out for a drink afterwards to apologize. But that was my clear instruction, because the Middle East belongs to us. And now that's not so much the case. The Russians are in Syria. Everybody's opening relations with Israel. The Chinese are building highways all over the Arabian Peninsula. It's just different now. It's not ours like it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago.
1,000% different. And it would be a very interesting time to go and spend some time there in that region, because I'm sure you could see the changes sort of popping up around you, whether it's, the United States pulling out, stopping some of what it's doing in the region. You could see infrastructure coming up. There's just a lot of, again, like you're saying, a lot of deeper changes in that region.
May I add something to that? Because I think that's an important point. Back in the day, Dubai was the model, right? Dubai was it was unbelievably clean and modern, and everybody spoke English, and it had these beautiful new state-of-the-art buildings using cutting-edge technology. Well, now, in the Arabian Peninsula, every country's like that, except Yemen, of course. But every country's like that. Why? Because they've all opened to China and to Chinese investment. They've opened to Russia. If you go, for example, to Sharjah Airport, Sharjah is the next emirate south of Dubai. You can't tell anymore where Dubai ends and Sharjah begins, because it's that developed. But if you go to Sharjah Airport, everybody's speaking Russian. Why? Because Russian investors have gone to Sharjah, just like American and British investors had gone to Dubai in a generation before them. So it's far more internationalized now. There are far more countries involved in the economic development of the region. And as a result, the U.S. just doesn't have the overall authority that it used to.
What does this mean going forward? Let's say like 10 years, per se. And I know I'm asking you to take on a crystal ball, but I guess I'm looking for geopolitical influence or geopolitical consequences of this kind of economic development.
Sure.
I mean, I would imagine it's going to create ties or international ties with the various countries. But
I actually think that's an easy one, and it's not a very nice answer. I think economically it's going to continue to develop, certainly. And economically, the Chinese, the Russians, the European Union, they're all going to be involved in this economic development, but the Palestinians are going to be left behind. There's nothing for them. Listen, the Arabs have been talking about building a port for Gaza and an airport for Gaza since the 80s. And the Saudis have said that they would finance it. And the Israelis said not in a million years. And so as a result, here we are all these years later. And the only way to legitimately get food and medications and things into Gaza is through Israel. Unless you're smuggling it through Egypt, and the Egyptians have made that very difficult, the only way to do it is through Israel. And it's a chokehold on Gaza.
Well, I guess that leads to two questions. Why is Egypt making it difficult? But more importantly, where does this end? I mean, the question of ethnic cleansing, the question of genocide has been brought up. The two-state solution, the West Bank and Gaza are basically split. You have this kind of water shortages, the amount of land is just still being appropriated. There are no peace talks at this point.
Right.
And if the point is, okay, yeah, we're going to just appropriate more and more and more land, there's nothing to stop us. The United States is going to protect us anytime we take more land, so there's no point in negotiation. Where does this end? I mean, where do they put Palestinians? Kind of like in the reservations? Because I've always compared this to Native American, basically, if we had a video camera and we could look at what was taking place in regards to America with the Native Americans, I think it's that. I think the difference is our point of view is different. So we have this kind of weird skew in the country that justifies what is taking place. So where does that end? Why is Egypt sketchy in regards to opening that port? And where does, what is the end goal for Israel at this point and for Palestinians?
The Egyptian land border is closed and has been closed for a couple of years because the Israelis have pressured the Egyptians to close it in order to seal Gaza off. The Gazans have dug tunnels. It's an unbelievably sophisticated number of tunnels and quality of tunnels, both into Egypt and into Israel. The Israelis are constantly setting off explosives in order to collapse the tunnels. So the Egyptians have closed the border because of smuggling. They don't want weapons to go in. They don't want unauthorized, medicines or whatever. It's a stranglehold on Gaza. It's a stranglehold on all the Palestinian people. The Israelis do the same thing in the West Bank, where the West Bank is this island under a military chokehold, really. And so, the Egyptians see the Gazans as bit players in the greater scheme of their political relations with the Israelis. It's just not worth it to them to antagonize the Israelis by helping the Palestinians. And so when the Israelis come to them and say, please close the border, by God, they close the border. Well, and they've been doing that since relations were established.
John, we've only got about a minute or two left with you. I want to make a quick comment and then pass it back to you for a last question. The fact that Israel has nuclear weapons and would use them from appearances,
sure,
puts them on a level where you can't. If you're another large country, developed country with nuclear weapons, your own arsenal, you don't want them to fail. You don't want them to go through any serious civil unrest, because that, whoever had their hands suddenly on the reins and was able to fire those nuclear weapons could, permanently disrupt a region, permanently damage a lot of people's lives, cause a lot of problems. For that reason alone, there are, many countries around the world with a high level of interest in what happens politically in Israel and to Israel and surrounding this question. And of course, the rub has always been the fact that it's recent land, the fact that it was recently occupied, and then you have this ongoing oppression, apartheid situation with the Palestinians. But wouldn't China and Russia have not just a vested interest in what happens there, but also the ability and the intent, I would argue, to affect the situation when they come in? And if that's the case, if you agree with me there, what do you think they're going to do about it? And when? When would this happen? As the United States' influence is fading, that's what's kept Israel from facing serious repercussions here. Wouldn't China and Russia pretty quickly get involved, John?
I know we're pressed for time, so I'll give you a quick answer. And I think that answer is no, because even though the Russians have made political inroads, even though the Chinese have made economic inroads, the U.S. is still the big boy on the block there. And the Russians and the Chinese don't want to antagonize the United States by inserting themselves in a political problem.
Say 20 years
so
from
I
now,
think
though.
we're not there yet.
But say,
20 years from now, sure. I think we have a different situation 20 years from now. And you're right about nuclear weapons, too. I mean, somebody has to step in and tell the Israelis no. And clearly, we're not the ones that are going to do it.
Wait, do you really believe they would use those nuclear weapons?
No. Only if the cause is lost. Only if Arab hordes are overrunning Jerusalem. That's it. That's what those weapons are for. Or in retaliation for an Iranian strike.
We've got to close it here. John, thank you for joining us. Great conversation.
My pleasure. Good to talk to you both.
Hey, and to you too. And we're all in D.C. again. I'm now back in D.C., so maybe you'll see you around the studio sometime. We got
awesome. Looking forward to that.
Absolutely. Same. Got to close the segment out. That was John Kiriakou, former CIA officer, co-host of The Backstory on Radio Sputnik, and author of books, including the CIA Insider's Guide to the Iran Crisis and The Reluctant Spy. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment with our next guest, Chris Smalls, talking Amazon unionization and what's coming next. Be right back with Chris on the other side of this short break.
Fault Lines. We are talking
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
You are listening.
We give you the most essential out of the endless information space.
Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Peer into the future with Political Misfits on Thursdays, when we analyze the latest trends in news, politics, and culture. Catch us on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Achtung, baby.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we are joined by Chris Smalls. Christian Smalls is an activist and organizer best known for staging a walkout at an Amazon regional fulfillment center in Staten Island, New York, following the company's failure to protect him and his fellow workers after learning an employee had tested positive for COVID-19. And you can follow Chris on Twitter at @shut_down_Amazon. Chris, thank you for joining us this morning. How are you doing?
Hey, how you doing? Good morning, everybody. I'm good. Can't complain, maybe a little bit, but who's listening?
Hey, well, we are. We got an audience for sure. Last time we had you on, you were describing, I wouldn't say complaining, but you were describing some of the problems you'd faced when you interacted with the union down in Bessemer, Alabama. Now, I want to come back to that definitely at some point during the limited time that we have with you. But first, I want to talk about what's coming next. Again, you've been pushing for unionization at Amazon, both in New York and across the nation, for quite a while now. Since mid last year, but this has been such an eternally long year that feels like forever. But you've been active, busy, and you've gotten quite a bit of coverage, quite a bit of your own sort of momentum going. So I guess where will you try to take that? What are you going to use that for on this side of Bessemer, on this side of the no vote? Where do you go with that, Chris?
Absolutely. I mean, it's funny you mentioned it because I'm right now currently outside of my former facility, JFK in Staten Island, unionizing. I'm out here with the Amazon Labor Union, the independent union, and I've been out here for the last 2.5 weeks now, every single day getting cards signed for our union that we're trying to form over here in Staten Island. So I'm on the ground every day, and I'm trying to, once again, try this again and be successful this time with these workers here in New York.
From your standpoint, what did I know you had your take in regards immediately after the losing of that vote, but what have you guys learned from that? Meaning, if you had to take on, you had to have a conversation with another union, let's say either where you are now or anywhere else around the United States, on specifically dealing with Amazon and the things that you wanted to transcend, what would those things be? What would be the issues?
Yeah, absolutely. The number one thing that I've seen that was a missed opportunity for them was, building up the workers' committee while you're unionizing. And what I mean by that is not just having conversations and getting cards signed. It's actually getting people on the inside to take some type of direct action towards the company with you. Stand in solidarity with the organizers. So that's what we're doing here on the ground differently in New York. We are involving workers in the activities that we're doing now. Like, we just had a barbecue last week, and we invited, we fed over 200 workers. And it worked in our favor because we're earning the trust while we're unionizing. We're showing these workers that a worker-led movement, a self-funded movement, and having these relationships, talking to them every single day, answering their questions, not even forcing them to sign the card. We're educating them first, giving them the education on what a union does, what it provides. These things work hand in hand, and then building up our committee. When you sign the card, we have the option for you to be a part of our committee, in which that allows you internal access to our group chats and how we organize and how we plan things. And you see full transparency of what the union does for the workers, and it's been working so far.
Oh, that's interesting. That's actually kind of cool in its own way. I could see that. And please, if you have more of those barbecues soon, do please invite me. That sounds delicious. No, but
we are having one Thursday.
That's great. No, but Chris, there's actually something, we had you on again pretty recently to talk about the failure of the Amazon vote, which there was an Amazon vote on unionization going on at a warehouse, an Amazon warehouse in Bessemer, Alabama. They went through this vote. It was a no, so they're not going to be unionizing. That would have been the first unionization at any Amazon facility and a sort of big bellwether in the unionization process in the tech industry, depending on how that went. Again, though, as it turns out, it was a no. Now, you described to us last time you joined us in what was a surprise and a pleasant one for Jamarl and I, just because it was your personal perspective. You have built a name for yourself with your pushback against Amazon and the work that you've done. You've gotten a lot of press. And so you went out to Bessemer. You were trying to work with the local union. What was the name of that one, Chris?
RWDSU.
RWDSU, thank you. And basically, they didn't welcome you in. They I think took your advice without enacting any of it. They gave you an audience, basically, but you wanted to do more with them, and they were distant. Now, something that came to me after we had you on last time, literally later in the show, I briefly mentioned it. Isn't there just the possibility, Chris, that one of the reasons they wouldn't have wanted to work with you guys is the whole guillotine thing? And in light of you talking about, where you'd go, where would you go with that? Do you still do that kind of thing? Because it seems like I could see a random union being a little bit cautious about working with an organization that is like sort of staged improv art, political activism stuff. Anyway, yeah, with guillotines outside of Bezos' house, one of them at least, for instance. Chris, what's your take?
Yeah, I would hope that wasn't the reason, but from my perspective, I think from what they told me out of their own mouths, they told me that basically they don't want to intimidate workers even further, whatever that meant. And
intimidate workers?
Well, if you started putting guillotines outside of the workers' houses who were not joining the union, that would be pretty intimidating.
Right.
But
right. So
that doesn't seem like the kind of thing you do.
What do they mean by intimidate workers?
Yeah, they meant the fact that, I was fired publicly.
Oh, yeah.
They felt that if workers knew that I got fired for standing up against the company,
They wouldn't want to go with that. They'd be like, I don't want to get fired. It's pretty simple. It wouldn't.
Interesting.
I could see that, but
see that too.
But you've also gotten a lot of positive press.
They didn't care about that. They didn't care about the fact that I was literally in all their articles too, as well.
Yeah.
They want to keep this from what they told me. Once again, these are their words. They wanted to keep it an Alabama local thing, and I didn't know what that meant. I'm like, the whole world is watching you guys.
And they got crushed.
A local Alabama thing, and I'm like, the strength is in numbers, and the strength is in our stories. If workers come down there from different parts of the country, which I brought, and tell them how much we need the union to these actual Amazon workers, that's supposed to resonate, and it did. It did for the ones we spoke to, but they didn't see it that way.
Because this was supposed to be something all over the United States at that point. I mean, it wasn't going to stay in Bessemer. Here's a question from the standpoint of, like right-to-work states and everything else. And one of the arguments that's often used against the union is, well, they're going to take your money. They're going to take your money. Amazon, they was using that. They would have these ads. Oh, they're going to take your money. You go to the bathroom, you using a urinal. They're going to take your money. Yeah. It's like that. I mean, what about this argument of the unions showing value to such an extent where the people would happily give the cash where it's not forcibly taken? I mean, there are some unions that propagate in that way. I mean, is this, somewhat of a valid way of propagation where the union exists without the forcible dues? Or no, that drains too much away from the union? I guess the thing is, can the union show value in and of itself in the way that it propagates where the question of union dues becomes irrelevant?
Right. And I would tell you this. I believe we could. I honestly believe that from forming this independent union that we're doing now, we're raising our own funds. We're paying out of pocket, but we're showing that we have so much power just by the things that they've done already. They already started doing the things they've done 6 to 8 months into Bessemer's campaign to us now. They got the signs up. They're sending out the text messages. They called the police on us. They called the fire department. They built up a fence around our campaign, our tent. So our power is within the people. There's no price on that. And the mistake that I think the RWDSU also did, they didn't address the union dues. They pretty much danced all around it by saying we're here to fight for people's dignity and respect and grievances, which is
got to deal with the dues.
But you still gotta address that in some aspect because we're getting that same feedback up here as well.
Chris,
so what about the dues? So we gotta address those right away.
Chris, one last question. We've only got like a minute left with you. What can you do with unions on the internet? What can you do right now, and what should they be doing? What big changes could we see in how unions work, how they get their job done? You talked about having a private messaging board, like a private messaging system. I'm just curious to hear from you with the sort of locally self-serving thing that you saw here. How would you try to do better than that, Chris?
So I would say, unions are traditional. They're still using traditional style methods, trying to be secretive about organizing. But we're in a different century now. We're in the 21st century. Technology, social media, we got to utilize all of that when you're unionizing as well. So everything that you're seeing with our campaign, we're putting Amazon on Front Street. If they call the cops, you're going to know real time. If they do something, send a text message to employees, you're going to know real time. These things that happen to us in the union drive, in the trenches, the public needs to know so they understand how hard it is, how difficult it is to unionize, and hopefully that'll galvanize people in the public to stand with the unions and with the workers. And I think if unions take a note from what we're doing, you'll see a lot more unions trying to pop up, especially against Amazon. And it'll probably make the fight a little bit difficult for Amazon to do their union busting ways the way they did in Bessemer.
Chris, we've got to close it here. Interesting conversation. Chris Smalls, thank you for joining us. Christian Smalls, activist, organizer, best known for staging a walkout at an Amazon regional fulfillment center. Check him out on Twitter at @shut_down_Amazon. Learn more about his work. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a minute with headlines in the last hour of this morning's show.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is time now for another edition of the most disruptive show covering news, events, politics, and more from across these disunited states of America and the increasingly fragmented and battled surface of our globe. In the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the last man on the wall, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Alrighty, folks. I hope you're having a great morning. Let's get into the headlines. First up, in COVID news, more than 36,450 new COVID cases were reported in the United States yesterday, with just under 370 new deaths. Over the past week, there's been an average of 39,124 new cases per day. That's a decrease of 29% from the average listed 2 weeks earlier. 35% of the American public has been fully vaccinated, up to over a third at this point, and 46% of residents, almost half, have received at least one dose of a COVID vaccine. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected more than 32,772,500 people across the United States and killed about 581,660. The Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine has been approved for teens aged 12 to 15, with the drug maker Pfizer also looking to expand the ages of those who can be treated to kids aged 11 and under. So, right now, the statistics that I'm giving, the 29% or the 35% fully vaccinated, 46% partially vaccinated, those are for, all people. Those are not just adults. So if you were to suddenly open up vaccines to the wider public, that would cause those numbers to go up significantly. In national political news, President Biden has said that Russia is not responsible for an attack on the Colonial Pipeline, saying that the Russian government, however, quote, has some responsibility to deal with, end quote, a Russian cyber criminal gang that the United States has accused of the attack. In international news, at least seven students were shot and killed during a school shooting in the city of Kazan in Russia, as a 19-year-old who had attended the school opened up fire. 11 were said to have been killed total, including non-students, with over a dozen others hospitalized with wounds. Israeli and Palestinian forces began openly warring as Israelis celebrated Jerusalem Day, a celebratory holiday marking Israel's taking of East Jerusalem in the Arab-Israeli War of 1967. Hamas threatened to launch rockets if Israel did not withdraw. Israel did not withdraw. Hamas launched rockets. Then Israel has launched airstrikes. Dozens have been killed. Official figures out of China show the continued slowing birth rate, with about 1.41 billion people in China. That's an increase of just over 0.5% from 2010, a decade ago. In Thailand, 3 journalists and 2 activists who fled to Thailand from Myanmar are being put on charges of illegally entering the country. They will be returned to Myanmar if convicted. Myanmar, of course, still, through the process, it has undergone a military coup, and there's currently a junta in charge of Myanmar. In Iran, registration has begun for the country's presidential election next month. Current President Hassan Rouhani cannot join that race, as he has already served 2 terms as president. And with that, those are our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. There we go. And we're back here, Jamarl.
Excellent. So I was looking at the Chinese rocket. Apparently, there are 2 more of those that are going to drop into Earth's orbit. How weird is that? So this is apparently, what is it, the European Space Agency? And they are basically saying right here, the world can expect at least 2 repeats of the uncontrolled Chinese rocket, according to Europe's space agency. What on earth is going on with that? I mean, like, I don't think it's necessarily a positive thing when things are falling from space. I mean, this goes, you know what? This gets to the whole idea of when one person does something, it's not just isolated. The person is not in a bubble. It's like, so it's like, I want my individual liberty and freedom. Yes, but what happens when the air that you breathe affects the fact that I'm breathing that same air? Or in this case, we put something in the sky and it falls back to the earth. Okay, do we need to put rule sets around what we put in the sky? And if so, isn't that this kind of world global treaty that needs to take place?
You're saying you want a treaty that will force spaceships to wear masks?
Pretty much. Pretty much.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's exactly what I want. I want a treaty that forces spaceships to wear masks. No, what I want, I guess, is this understanding or cooperation that we are connected on this planet. And if we are going into space, how about just not having stuff fall back to Earth? I mean, like, that just seems like a big deal. Like, that thing could have hit anywhere.
But you say that as if you're not trying to violate one of the fundamental known laws of physics, that of gravity, the idea that we are a mass and that things are going to come towards us. You're saying that as if it's not like a small feat, as if space travel in general, to our tiny terrestrially bound human brains, is just the most incredible thing ever. You can float up there through a vacuum. None of us have ever been able to fly, for gosh sakes, and all of a sudden we're able to blast off to the other side of the known universe over the course of many thousands of years of hibernation, possibly. Anyway, that you're fighting gravity inherently, Jamarl.
Yes. Yes.
That's a mean feat. I mean,
that is a mean feat. By the same token, I think we've been able to conquer it, the International Space Station. That's not falling and plummeting back to Earth. I mean, when we worked together, we put it up there, it stayed. When they did it separately, it fell back to Earth. Does that not indicate that God wants us to work together going into space?
Now you're pulling out God, Jamarl?
This has nothing to do with Star Trek. This is everything.
Well, you're talking about God. Is this Q in Star Trek lingo? Is that what you're talking about?
It just seems cosmic, right? I mean, I guess, look, I don't like stuff falling out of the sky, especially if it hit other people. And I am ideologically rigid on this point, so fair enough. But I think it is a horrible, horrible mistake for us to go into the cosmos singularly. And the fact that these rockets are plummeting in the Earth makes my point that much more clear.
I like space travel, and if it comes with rockets falling on me occasionally, I wouldn't survive, but I would be satisfied with that reality. Yeah,
as long as it's rare, and this is like 3 within the course of like a week.
I hear you. No, but I mean the thing is, yeah, no, I hear you. And you're talking about the crashed Chinese returning rocket. Yeah,
as it fell in what, the ocean, the Indian Ocean, or something like that.
Yes, yeah, near the Maldives.
Yeah,
but I hear you on that, but at the same time, that's what, you're developing prototypes. Look at SpaceX, for instance,
right,
which, gosh, just recently had its first successful prototype of the Starship. The name of the Starship is
People
Starship.
should watch that landing. That thing is wild. Is that the one that lands upright and
yes.
Oh, that is so wild.
Well, because the reusability is a big part of what the draw is for SpaceX and what is genuinely sort of more revolutionary, even though it's a pretty basic idea. The idea that you don't have to create a new rocket every flight is kind of convenient. The idea that you can reuse most of the parts, just refuel it, and it'll be good to go within
fall back to Earth.
Hours or days. If it doesn't fall back to the Earth in a plummeting meteor of man-made death.
Yeah, fully ballistic. No, man, I look, this gets to the Elon Musk conversation and everything else, and I am... One of the things that enamors me, honestly, is space stuff. I mean, like, we're going to try to get scientists and everything else on to have those conversations. I mean, but honestly, the brain technology by itself that Elon Musk is making is astonishing.
You know what? We never really talked about his SNL appearance yesterday. We
got
into it very briefly.
Yeah.
But
did you get the opportunity to see it?
Oh, yeah. But what I thought was, what I was thinking about this, I was talking with my brother about this. He moved into D.C. with me, and so we've been driving around a lot, went to IKEA, setting up furniture around the apartment, having a grand old time using this box truck that we rented while we have it. Anyway, while we were doing one of these trips, I got into a conversation with him about Elon Musk. Elon Musk is that guy, literally, who grew up being a kid who wanted to build spaceships and fast cars, and then became that person. And so I think there's something sort of viscerally role modeling for a lot of people about looking at that kind of person. And even though he says disagreeable stuff on Twitter, which he weirdly both defended and made fun of during his SNL opening monologue, even though he has some of those quirks, people are willing to give a lot in terms of, generosity of believing their intent, good faith, that kind of thing, just because they like the fact that the dude went from A to B, went from being that kid in some sense, because we get a lot of people can identify with that. Men or women, whatever, you can identify with growing up, wanting some things, and then somehow being the actual mofo to make those things happen.
Yeah. And he did it. He built a rocket ship.
Yeah.
I mean, for God's sake, he built a rocket ship.
Yes.
And, the rocket ship could land. He built the satellites, the Starlink stuff. Now, the Starlink is a little weirder, only because, is that going to adversely affect their ability to look out into space and that type of stuff?
And then there's Neuralink, which is even weirder.
Neuralink is the one that I am wowed over. I mean, all the other stuff is wild, but the Neuralink one. I mean, have you seen the machine that they're talking about using to put that in people's heads? Yeah, it's like and they move on to the next one. And it's like, wow. Because your first question becomes, okay, how are you going to get that thing in? Are you going to get this kind of huge surgery? Well, no, we have this machine that's going to automatically put that in your heads. And I'm telling you, it's going to, the draw for this, mark my words. People are like, I will never get it. I will never get it. But it's going to be like the COVID vaccine. Hey, did you get the COVID vaccine in order to come back to work? Sure. Or it's going to be this thing of, it's like, okay, they're going to put it in your head and it's going to like, all right, it has additional memory retention. Or maybe it helps with blindness. Or maybe it helps with hearing. And then it's like, hey, there's a side effect quirk that people have extra memory retention, even though it's for blindness. And then there's going to be certain jobs where based on things that they're going to add to it, where you just may want to have it for your own use. Like I really do believe it's going to be the slow escalation into something that is going to potentially revolutionize our culture.
Yeah.
I mean, think of like you're walking through the world and you're interacting with it and there's no, glass over your face. Yeah. It's just you interacting with the world and there's something being projected to your brain. And, the catch is, do you want something monitoring your brain waves like that for the time when you walk, get up, that it can mirror all of that stuff back at you? You have all of this data going on for 20, 30, 50 years of all of these people on the planet that have decided to use it. What can you use that data for? I mean, this gets very
those are where all of the problems.
Yeah.
Well, I guess you could start with the problem of having something implanted in your brain as a consumer product.
Right.
Which is itself kind of risque.
Right.
But of course, the privacy concerns, access to the data, who gets it,
radical
how they get to
concerns.
use it.
Yeah.
Huge privacy concerns. And we're not talking about your smartphone. We're talking about the contents of the material manifestation of your soul or whatever.
The cops get access to that? Can you imagine that?
God.
Can you imagine the kill switch where they would be like, cut the person off?
This stuff gets fairly terrifying fairly quickly.
Yes.
I've been within 15 feet of Elon Musk. I saw him speak at a conference maybe 7 years ago.
Did you touch the hem of his garment chain?
I know, but I was standing about 8 feet away from him as he and a small retinue strolled through. This was back in, I'm guessing, 2015. This would have been, 6 years ago this coming August. So it would have been August 2015. Yeah. I remember him talking about, it's interesting that he moved on to Neuralink in 2016, that he started that project up.
Yeah.
Another, in its own way, natural extension of that kind of ambition. But he was talking about nanotechnology and how from an engineering perspective, nanotechnology is radically inefficient.
Yeah.
Which is just interesting to think about. You think of, okay, so you have to get some work done. You have to get something moved or get something rotated around a space, It's usually, there's a scale that we're used to working in where that stuff applies.
It's our typical,
It's our typical scale. It's this 3D, 5 foot, 3 foot, 6 foot, 10 foot reality or whatever that we're operating.
Take it to a millimeter.
Yeah, take it to the tiniest
nanometer,
a couple nanometers, and all of a sudden the amount of work that you have to do to make that thing work goes up tremendously. And so, from what he was saying, it was just an interesting conversation. I'll put it like this: he's a smart dude. So the same person that built these companies knows how to do a lot of the math that they're running on, is the assumption.
At the very least in the basics.
Yeah. And grew up, when he was in school, I believe he was studying steady state battery technology that he later used in the creation of Tesla.
Yeah.
So I like the idea. And with him coming back to SNL, with him coming out as a dude with Asperger's syndrome, that's also I can see why a lot of people are hooray that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden it's statistically significant. If you have Asperger's syndrome, does that mean that you're more likely to be wealthy? Those questions. He is the wealthiest person on the planet.
With Asperger?
With Asperger.
Do we know that?
I think so. I mean, if he says that, think about that. Look at the list of wealthiest people. He's at the top of it. He passed Bezos a while back. If the wealthiest person on the face of this planet has a quote-unquote mental issue, and I'm not saying that that's certainly not how I would portray it, but and I think that largely, but culturally, we even have issues portraying it that way. But it's a syndrome, of course.
Learning issue.
Yeah, but if the wealthiest person has it, is it actually a bad thing?
What
or
if two of them have
is this a huge shift? Well, go for it.
And if two of them have it, does it mean that there's an advantage in having it that we don't have? It's preferred in our
Does
societies?
Zuckerberg have it?
Right. For example.
Does Bill Gates have it?
In which case you have this notion of, okay, does it allow people to be more, I don't know, plugged in? Like it's hard to explain. Like there are a lot of people with Asperger's or something that plays chess or autism. And those kids, sometimes they would sit there and they would be plugged in. It's hard to explain it.
Yeah.
They play, I don't want to say they play differently than people who don't have it, but there is a different level of intensity in the way that they seem to be plugged into the game. Sometimes that doesn't work well because they're kids and they, pop a thing, but all kids can do that. But no, I've met one or two kids who played. And so, look, they can be this kind of weird advantage. Like one of the mistakes I think we make sometimes, especially in this country, we would look at another country and we say, oh, that country is XYZ horrible. And you never take into account, well, what is that country getting though? What makes that system work? Maybe those people are okay with getting healthcare, education, etc., and they're willing to give up some of their rights for it, and they think that's a balancing act. Well, the same thing may be true with this, where there are certain qualities that you may get while you may lose other qualities. Your ability to interact socially may be depreciated while simultaneously you boost your ability for intellectual pursuits. You know what I mean? It's not something that the person is choosing per se, at least not on this kind of cosmic, corporeal level. But at the very least, it's something that, if you find 3 of the wealthiest people with it, then does that mean that there's some kind of inherent advantage, especially in regards to the way that we organize our society and the way that we organize the pursuit of information, or for that matter, wealth, that has an advantage inherent? Like, again, it's not their choice, per se. It may just be the way his brain works. And it may be the way their brain works in a way that's advantageous into maximizing either profit or maximizing educational pursuit. And so, I don't know. It may be the tunneling effect in regards to their thoughts. But either way, he clearly he's done great things in regards to what he's been able to build. So those are your headlines. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment with the one and only Kim Iverson.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Want to know how international issues fit into local ones and how local issues fit into international ones? With the historical context to tie them together? Well, we're bringing it to you all by any means necessary. Tune in weekdays from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to hear me, Jackie Lukman, alongside my co-host, Sean Blackman. By any means necessary, your guide to connecting the social, political, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys are in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps makes this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. We've been having this conversation about whether or not it's possible to have a populace without a populace, a popular candidate without a population for that candidate to be popular with. When Biden or when Bernie Sanders was running in the race, you had 20,000 people, 30,000 people. When IOC came out after Bernie Sanders had his heart attack and everybody thought Bernie Sanders was over with, and he comes out and Bernie Sanders looks perfectly okay, and the crowd is going bananas, and AOC gives her speech and everybody's excited, and it's like, oh my God, there's Bernie in him. And despite the heart attack, he takes off. Those people were jazzed and energized, but Biden doesn't have that, despite the fact that this is supposed to be an FDR-esque, an LBJ-esque, maybe even a Truman-esque presidency. Where are those people? How is Biden running as a quote-unquote populist in the things that he's saying without an actual population backing him? And how weird is it for him to run in this kind of weird way without the mob or without any of those people backing him in regards to the way that a populist would typically run in the race? To have a conversation about this, whether it's possible, whether it's working, I mean, that's probably the main question. We're joined with Kim Iverson. Kim Iverson is an independent journalist and host of the Kim Iverson Show on YouTube and Rofkin. Kim, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, Puffle Smoke Joe Biden. This is something, we dealt with this in the monologue today because I thought it was very weird. Under normal circumstances, a candidate is running and they're like scorched earth. Like I said, Sanders, you know, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to take on the billionaires. But Biden never did that. And even in the context of what Biden is saying, he's just saying those things. Hey, put it on my desk, put the $50 an hour minimum wage on my desk, put the unions but America, put it on my desk. Like he does that. And then he goes away somewhere and he vanishes. And then he comes back and he says something else like that. But it's one of those things where you don't, at least I don't, believe that Biden wants those things on his desk. He's just saying it to get credit for it. And so it's like some of the stuff he may want, but whether or not he's going to have the capacity to do is the point. And whether or not, regardless of what he says, is he going to get it passed? And at this point, I'm unclear how, considering there's a finite amount of time for them to do anything but the filibuster. He doesn't seem like he wants to do it. Didn't want to do anything to the parliamentarian. So, I mean, what am I missing here, Kim? The public seems to be on board for this. Republicans seem to have a hard time combating him. I mean, is it working? I mean, is it possible that we have a populist candidate without the populace?
Well, I think that, you know, remember with Joe Biden that what he ran on was actually a very popular message, and that was defeat Donald Trump. So in a way, you know, it's the populist movement obviously is mostly about, you know, kind of re-energizing the middle class and bringing politics back to the people and whatnot. And even though Joe Biden is not a populist in the traditional sense of what a populist is, I do think that he is, I guess, kind of using the language you're using, you know, kind of a populist in that he did run on a popular message.
Yeah.
And so the country united around just remove Donald Trump and return back to normalcy. So Joe Biden is doing exactly that. And that includes, you know, things like not touching the filibuster or the parliamentarian or, you know, a variety of things that many people on the left, progressives, want. Joe Biden, his only goal is to restore America back to normalcy. And that includes trying to get us back into pre-pandemic life and trying to get the economy back on track. And so some of the things that he's going to do when it comes to the economy and getting us back into the pre-pandemic life will look somewhat progressive on the surface. So it might have like a flare of forward. And I think there will be progress made because in order to get us back on track, you do have to be somewhat radical in some things.
Yeah.
And so I think that'll naturally sort of happen. So I think history is going to look down on Joe Biden actually pretty fondly. But, yeah, I mean, he's not really a populist candidate. He's just trying to get us back to normal.
Tepid.
It's weird because
and people want that.
People
want that.
Yeah, people want, for one thing, they want the fire to get put out when it comes to the national political stage and what was happening between 2016, 2017, 2018, that whole thing with Trump and the multiple impeachments and constant talk of scandals and Russiagate, the talk of treason on the highest levels of our country. That was a pretty spicy period in recent American political history, clearly, and we're still sort of calming down from the induced stress there. But what I don't want to leave out of this conversation, you have the media driving this. You have the government driving it. You have the interests of some corporations driving it. All of the pushback and a lot of the pushback against Trump was, as far as I can tell, a useful tool for maintaining the power of the current political establishment, which is long live the current political establishment. The queen is dead. Long live the queen. Effectively, a kind of situation. A lot of the pushback against Trump was created by the media, and the fact that the public is now responding to that and the government is responding to the public, it seems like maybe this is just inherently what happens. The fact that social opinion is useful in our political system has led to often the deadening, but it's like sharpening it into a tool. The deadening of the social compact culture, the politics of society, all these things are steered by our media because the government wants to be able to respond to them in a certain way. And for that response to be set up, we need to be that way. In other words, the media, the government, our political system created the public sense of Trump, and our government is now choosing to respond to that. It all feels fabricated to me. Kim, what's your take?
Well, I mean, I think that the politicians understand that we do have to get things back on track. So I do think that I think that they definitely are going to try to get us back on track and do what the people want, while still simultaneously attempting to hold on to their power. But they're really finding that their power is slipping, and they're having a difficult time continuing to clench onto it. The Republicans are definitely feeling that right now. They don't know what is going to happen to their party in the next couple of years, and Democrats are really digging their claws in deeper.
Well, that's what I was going to go with that. What does the Republican Party stand for at this point? I mean, if you think about it, you've had Lindsey Graham. I mean, we had this clip the other day where Lindsey Graham was basically telling Liz Cheney to shut up. All of these guys are attacking Liz Cheney. And as far as I can tell, Liz Cheney has been ideologically consistent with Trump. So let's be very clear. So the only thing that she's been inconsistent on, or the thing that she's been consistent but they hate her for, is saying you lost. And not just you lost, you didn't win by a landslide. It was a putsch attempt. And that seems to be a breach too far. I mean, I was watching the footage over the weekend, and Fox News has been minimizing it, but they've been going after her. The other Republicans have basically want her to step down. McCarthy, who was screaming on the phone for Donald Trump bloody murder when those people were coming to get him, and they were screaming, Trump, 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 when they were at the door. He all of a sudden, born anew, hey, this party needs Trump. It's very weird. And so it's like this notion of power, well, Trump still has it. That hasn't gone anywhere. And so it's like, what does the Republican Party stand for? And is that Trump? Or is that basically Trump or the Republicans doing the same thing that Biden is doing? Where Biden is speaking these lefty things, these tick to the left stuff. Where so you would have a Lindsey Graham to speak it without necessarily fundamentally changing anything about Lindsey Graham's policies.
I actually think the Republican Party doesn't have nearly as much control as the Democratic Party has over its establishment. I think the Republican Party actually is shifting, and I don't think that people, Liz Cheney, for one, she ideologically was, I think, very antithetical to Trump in a lot of ways, especially when it comes to war, when it comes to, there were a lot of, she's like the old guard. She represents the old guard. And I think that the Republican Party is fed up with the Bushes and the McCains and the Cheneys and the old Republican guard. And I think Mitch McConnell, actually, there's a real chance Mitch McConnell gets ousted. And because I think the Republican Party is totally shifting. And so, I think the only reason why Mitch McConnell might stick around is that the voting base really doesn't want the Democrats to continue to, dismantle, I guess, aspects of the institutions, not the establishment, but the institutions that they think are, law order, that kind of, like the filibuster, that retain some sort of order or some sort of power. But, I think the Republican Party, I think that we're going to see a serious shift with that party.
Agreed. I just don't know exactly into what. Yeah, it's kind of hard to tell.
I think it's going to be the party of the working class. I mean, I think that I think that everybody should divorce themselves from what they consider to be the left, because I think you might find yourself a Republican 4 years from now.
So maybe.
I really predict it. Yeah.
I love this conversation, right? Because this has been an argument that, well, argument is too strong, but we've been having this thing where I've made the point of saying either they break or they change. Like, because at a certain point, it seems that Democrats want to tick to the left and Republicans have to deal with that. And up to this point, they've been talking about, oh, look at the children's books and oh, this cancel culture. They have not been able to hit this stuff dead on the head. Whereas Trump offers them this kind of opportunity of, at the very least, the working class patina, if not necessarily Indeed itself. By the same token, what does it mean to be anti-war, or at the very least less warish for a political party? And definitely that seems to be what Trump pushes. But I guess the question becomes, what does it mean from an economic standpoint? And up to this point, I haven't necessarily seen those inroads where that translates into policy, just words. I mean, do you get my point? Like, I understand what you mean.
Yeah,
it seems that Joe Biden is trying to have
but-
this fight on working class, though, and that's one of his objectives, to win that argument.
Well, I think Joe Biden is I think Joe Biden is kind of by himself. The Democratic Party is still very establishment, very entrenched, and they only fortified themselves. When Bernie Sanders was rising and, all this progressivism was rising, the Democratic Party just really fortified. And that's where we thought, well, maybe we could make some inroads in the Democratic Party, and there seemed to be a path, and then they just clenched down. And I just don't see, as much as people think that the Republicans are this, big monolith of power, and they're not. They are not. In fact, I admire the fact that they actually have a more democratic system in their primaries than the Democratic Party, and they always have. So I think that they're actually the party that is easier to reform and change. And
because it's weaker. I hear you. I hear you there, because the sort of rigor mortis, whatever distribution of power that you have in the party, in the Democratic Party, they're going to try to keep that distribution of power roughly. It's trying to maintain the status quo. And so if you have a weaker system that you're going up against, it's easier to change. It's easier to modify it or reform it or potentially destroy it and replace it. Those kinds of thoughts. But it's not like Trump, as far as I can tell, has a clearly defined, clearly articulated formal foreign policy or domestic policy. He goes on his gut in a lot of cases, and it's refreshing in its own way to see a candidate that doesn't just follow party line policies and kind of invents their own almost on the fly, it seems in some cases. But that is Trump. I don't know what that represents, though, on, I know where he stands on current issues, but if I could try to codify that into a policy that I could use to predict what a Trump-like Republican Party is going to be doing and thinking in 15 years, say 10 or 15 years in the sort of midterm future, I don't know that I could do that. I don't know that I could take Trump, come up with some model of how he's going to behave, and then apply that. He's not a policy-based person. He's a sort of personality-based person. That's how I see it. Kim, what's your take?
You're seeing it all the time. You're seeing it in Florida. Ron DeSantis is a walking embodiment of what a political Trump, like an actual political Trump, because Trump is just kind of this wild card. But Ron DeSantis is the future of the Republican Party. And he is going to be exactly where that party is headed. And anybody who falls out of line from where he is not going to be in line with the Republican Party in not 10 years, but in 3, 4 years, 2 years. It's going to be the party of the Ron DeSantises. And a lot of us, can look at Ron DeSantis and his policies, and I have to say, even though I definitely don't agree with a lot of his policies, I agree much more with more of his policies than I do with somebody like Gavin Newsom or Andrew Cuomo.
Well, Cuomo is a particularly grotesque figure at this point. The thing with DeSantis, they are eating themselves alive at this point. Like this notion of they're complaining about cancel culture while simultaneously canceling pretty much Liz Cheney and everybody else that's part of that ilk. So the Romneys of the world, gone. But it's the Romneys of the world that are declaring, hey, but what about $12 or $11 an hour minimum wage? It's not the DeSantises of the world. Like, I don't see the working class thing. I think that's the thing that I'm getting at. Like, regardless, because for the longest time, the Democratic Party ran with the notion and the mantle of working class. while simultaneously getting all of this money from the various campaigns and fighting. I mean, we have, what's his name here? Joe Siegel. Joe Siegel will tell you how Democrats will fight behind the scenes, tooth and nail, to prevent policies that the American public, for the most part, agree with. And so there's nothing stopping the Republicans from basically taking rhetoric without necessarily having the actions behind it. That's what I see as the future of the Republican Party. Less so much that they actually embody the reality of the working class, but that they do at the very least have a fight for it, because the Democrats basically gave it up. And Biden, in this kind of fight for the mantle, whether he can do it or not is secondary to whether or not, the fact that he's trying. And so I take you that it's true that Donald Trump did rattle something there. The catch becomes whether or not they can, A, actualize on it, and B, whether they even mean it. And I got to be honest, I don't think they mean it. I don't believe they mean it for one item. Do you believe that they mean this, or do you think this is just rhetoric?
No, I think they mean it. I think the people have the power in the Republican Party. So that's why I think that the Republican Party has a real chance at being a people's party.
You're going strong on this.
Yeah, she's going very strong on this.
Yeah, no.
I guess we're trying to say, what do you have to show us as evidence that this is taking place? I guess that's something like policy-wise. Like, what's the, like Shane said, what's the policy?
Florida. I mean, Florida is it. I mean, he's not just down there talking. He's actually getting stuff done. And it is for the businesses. He's saying, look, I'm not going to he's done a lot of stuff in Florida for the businesses to keep them going, for the people, to keep them going.
I know people who've moved to Florida, right-wingers specifically, because they like what's going on in the state. So that
right.
That fits.
I think Florida is an actual example of it. And you've got a guy down there who, the minute he gets into office, he sets up a climate change committee to, he's serious about the environment. So no one can knock him for that, like they could for Trump.
Well, and Florida is also particularly susceptible.
Right.
Being such a low-lying, water-surrounded region.
But that's good. Then you've got a Republican that's actually paying attention to it.
Oh, yeah.
You've also got a Republican who immediately goes down there and says, listen, I don't care what you politicians think. The people voted to decriminalize marijuana. You're not going to block it. You've got a guy who says, we're going to do what the people want, and I'm not going to listen to you other people, you politicians. And he's been giving them all the finger, and the media as well, this whole time. Now, Ron DeSantis doesn't get much, and he's not all talk. The guy, when everybody's in cancel culture and kind of dealing with that, Ron DeSantis never gets into that, the same way that, like, Rick Perry or all these other politicians, Republican governors and whatnot, will kind of get into the cancel culture debates. Ron DeSantis is like, I've got a state to run, and we're in a pandemic, and I've got to get stuff done. I don't want to talk about that. So I think that you're looking at an actual embodiment of the future of the Republican Party. I think Ron DeSantis is exactly where that party is headed. And I think that it's not a necessarily bad place. I mean, we might not agree on everything with him, but again, I don't find him to be offensive in a lot, the same way Trump was offensive.
I think dumpster fire. I mean, look, just because, like John McCain, Republicans radically unempathetic under normal circumstances. However, when it's related to them, they care. So John McCain, torture, he hates torture. Bomb anywhere, hates torture. Same thing with Dick Cheney. Dick Cheney has a gay daughter, so he's okay with homosexuality. So yeah, I'm not shocked that Ron DeSantis, it's like, okay, I believe science on this front because this directly impacts me. I myself can be hit with a raindrop, Ron DeSantis, because of this. So fair enough. But I don't necessarily know what that goes from his belief in science or anything else going forward. That's just something that directly affects him. Also,
no, I mean, look at the state is being run well. I mean, you can't just say it's just rhetoric. He's actually running a state, and it's going well.
Florida's death rate is 155 per 100,000. I don't think that's great. I mean, California is about 141. So it's like, if we're talking about the death
in California.
Well, death rate is 141 in California per 100,000, and death rate is 155 per 100,000.
Wait, not fair at all. Their population is old. I mean, you're talking about a retirement.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair.
Not that.
No, you're right. You're right. That's fair. That's fair. That's fair. I'll stop. That's fair.
Also a bit more spread out.
I don't think anybody. Yeah, I mean, with the pandemic, I don't think anybody could really I don't believe that there was like an actual way to stop the virus. I think that's like we're a year into that now.
Yeah,
and no one's been able to control
I
it.
remember you've been saying that kind of thing a long time ago. We were talking about differences when the conversation around COVID, and admittedly I'm pivoting slightly, but I will come back in a couple seconds here. When we were talking about COVID, the idea of flattening the curve, the idea that you keep the base rate of infection low enough that hospitals don't get overrun, that was one solution. I also remember the hammer. There was like the hammer and the curve or something. It wasn't the hammer and the sickle, but I forget. There was this model that this person studied, or that this person published, where basically what you could do is effectively the China model, where you immediately at a high level shut everything down to the point where circulation is simply gone, and you do that on over a period of weeks, not months, let alone years. It seems like we've fallen in the middle in terms of our responses, but this brings me back, and I'm going to come back to Republicans going forward, 2022, 2024. How big of a deal do you think different states' COVID responses, the leadership shown during the coronavirus, during that pandemic, how is that going to affect the conversation and the thought process during the primaries, during the elections, 2022, 2024? Kim, I think you can see where I'm going here. We're not out of it yet, but we've sort of learned enough that it's affected the political conversation. How do you think that's going to be not too long from now, within the next year or two, Kim?
Well, I mean, I think it's kind of obvious already where that's headed, because you've got a bunch of the governors that are under fire are the Democrat states that locked down really hard. You've got California. We've got a recall of our governor. You've got Andrew Cuomo, who's under, people are coming up with scandals, and it's a variety of scandals with that guy. And you've got, the Democratic governors seem to be more under fire, whereas when you look at the Republican governors in the Republican states, how many of them are really getting any crap besides from CNN? But that doesn't count. CNN can say whatever they want about the Texas governor or the Florida governor or whatever governor they want that's Republican. That doesn't actually matter. The people in those states are not recalling those governors or trying to get those governors out of office. But you're looking at these other states and places like even New York. What's interesting about that is you've got a Democratic state. The people are more liberal. They're feeling, their automatic response to the virus has been also kind of along the lines of, well, we have to, they're more obviously opposite of what a lot of people on the right are being. But even though they don't want to use that necessarily as an ousting point for Andrew Cuomo, they still deep down feel ire. Yeah. Right? They're feeling upset. They're feeling ire. They don't want to necessarily point to the virus, but let's get real. That's really what it was. It was that they were locked down. They're feeling antsy, and they want that guy gone. But they just don't want to say it's because of the virus. Right?
I guess, but okay.
So they're coming up with all these other things.
So I hear you on the media coverage of it, and I hear you on the sort of at the state level how the different governments are choosing to handle it, how the different state governments are choosing to deal with this issue, and people are going to have their takes on that. But here's why I don't see this there being this mass shift right now from Democrats to Republicans, with the Republicans being the pick in 4 years, which is, of course, what you were saying earlier on when we were talking with you. Right now, the impression that I get is that you have two increasingly divided Americas. One America, if you're on one of the political sides of the spectrum, one America sees Biden as a saving grace from Donald Trump, and sees the opposite side, the right wing, as kind of crazy, kind of out there, willing to undergo civil war to get what it wants effectively, willing to engage in the riskiest of behaviors, willing to do what Trump supporters did on January 6th, basically. That's the impression of the other side. Where the right wing, I don't want to mischaracterize, but seems to see the Democrats, the Republicans seem to see the Democrats as responding abysmally to the COVID crisis, getting the results of the election completely wrong, where Trump, in their opinion, was rightfully the president, and we just got this. It seems like there are these two increasingly divided sides of America, and I simply don't believe that if you're in the left side of that spectrum, you're going to make the transition to the right side of the spectrum, and that this is going to be a mass process happening all over the place for millions, tens of millions of people. I don't see that happening because those seem to be two massively far apart spaces to be in.
Especially the woke left.
Jamarl says especially the woke left. And I can see that another side of this, Kim, and I want to hand it back to you to get your full-throated response. I don't know about, and I admit it might be a little bit pedantic as the only white dude in the conversation, but what about minorities? what about minority voters choosing to side with Democrats, as it seems like they traditionally have done, and how that's not going to magically change just because some stuff is shifting on the high level in the parties? Can minority voters actually look to Ron DeSantis' government for something desirable for them, or do you think that what do you think of that argument in general, Kim, on all this stuff?
Well, first of all, I agree with Jamarl that the woke left is just not going to suddenly wake up, no pun intended, and start voting Republican, right? They're not going to be like, oh, they're actually for the people, and the Democrats have become this elitist, warmongering, money-taking party.
Yeah.
They're not going to convert that way. But I do think that there's a lot of other people who have traditionally been Democrat, and they are the working class, and they are moving and shifting over to the Republican side. And I actually even see this happening in the immigrant population. Now, I have a bit of a bias because I come from the Vietnamese population, which is like the Cubans. They're Republican. And the Vietnamese community is really interesting because not only are they Republican and vote for Trump and vote for any Republican, really, but they also were extremely mindful of the virus. The Vietnamese community wore masks. I mean, you've got like an Asian population that has they're not adverse to wearing masks. They're not adverse to like harsher lockdown policies coming from like Vietnam and places of Asia. So they had like an interesting dynamic because they were very cautious of the virus and really compliant, but at the same time very Republican. But I do think that the immigrant population, like, for example, in California, they're starting to get fed up with the feeling that Democrats are lax on immigration, which is, I think a lot of that is more of a media portrayal of the Democratic Party than reality. But still, I think that there is there is a shift. And I do think their shift is they'll feel like they're wanting to move towards the people that are here and the working class people that are here rather than having their jobs taken away by immigrants that come in. And that is happening in LA.
Well, I give you this. From the standpoint of African Americans, there was an increase in the number of African Americans that voted for Trump, even from the standpoint of, like you say, immigrants. But it's very possible that had to do with the mail-in factor, not necessarily, meaning if everything else was equal and there was no mail-in, I don't necessarily know if that jump would have taken place. And from the standpoint of African Americans, I don't believe for one moment. I think you get 20, 30% that bounces back and forth, just like it was under Obama that went to Trump. But I don't necessarily know if you make any margins on those. And if you're not making margins on those, then I can't really say that there's something that's fundamentally taking place here. And especially, this assumes that Biden fails in his task. I think he is tepid. I think when you have 600,000 people die, that there's reparations that are demanded in the population itself. So these policies and everything else I'm okay with. But, there's a question to be asked on whether or not he succeeds. And it sounds like from your talk, he fails.
Well, I think that he succeeds in restoring us back to normalcy. So I do think we will get back to a point of normalcy under Joe Biden. But that won't be good enough once we get there. It's kind of like what's happening right now with the employment sector, right? You've got a lot of businesses saying, we can't find employees, find employees. And it's because people just don't want to go back to that normal. Even though normal is kind of here and starting to be here, people aren't as thrilled to go back to it. So even though Joe Biden is going to restore normalcy, I don't think people will be thrilled with that normalcy once it's back.
42% of the population was making $18,000 a year or less. And that was before COVID. That's normal. That is not sexy at all. That's horrible.
People aren't going to go back to that.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. So that is where the Republican Party is going to have some shifting. If they're really, truly for the workers, this is where it's going to, but the shift with the Republicans, it's not overnight. So we're still going to see massive pushback from the establishment, the Republican establishment, but it's slowly shifting. But it feels, it's actually quite rapid. When we look back in a few years, we'll be like, wow, that was a real kind of overnight shift, even though it's actually going to take, 8 years. But I do think that that's the one, hiccup with the Republican Party is how are they going to support the workers. I think it's obvious at this point that We need childcare. I don't know though. In Arizona is another interesting state to be watching the Republican politicians. Did you know the Republicans there just voted to increase community college to 4-year degrees, and I think it's like free for the population. And the Republicans, right? And that was like yesterday or 2 days, just recently. And it was a bipartisan effort. Republicans were championing it. I think there's a lot to look at that's not being, people aren't paying attention to it.
Well, that gets to the whole point of either you change or you break. And I just don't think the Republicans' position is tenable here. I mean, this notion of, okay, we're going to interstate cross-check. We're going to do the voting legislation stuff. We're going to do all of this stuff to kind of tweak the edges. But when you get down to it, what is your policy? And policies like that allow them to compete in real terms. And you're right. If they're passing stuff like that and passing child care, then Democrats are going to have a problem coming up with a message that shows enough differential between the two. So on that case, I think you will be right. If it's really one of those things where the Republican Party starts to move over and change as a result of feeling that they need to compete, then yeah, it's a new ballgame. Kim, thank you for joining us. The voice that you guys were listening to is Kim Iverson. She's an independent journalist and host of the Kim Iverson Show on YouTube and Rothkin. You guys can watch Kim's show on YouTube at youtube.com/Kim Iverson and at Rothkin/Kim, not mistaken. Fault Lines, Thomas and Stranahan back in a moment with the wrap.
Fault Lines.
Epidemics and pandemics could kill millions of people, and they actually did. Centuries ago, deadly outbreaks called the Black Death, the Plague of Justinian, and the Spanish flu ravaged countries, empires, and whole continents. Some of these diseases are still present around the globe. Others have become a thing of the past. Discover how these ancient and not-so-distant outbreaks from previous centuries differ from modern-day SARS, MERS, and coronavirus pandemics. Listen to our new series, Outbreak, the Deadliest Epidemics in Human History, this week on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we are taking your calls. 202-521-1320. Again, that's 202-521-1320. We have Tarif calling in from New Orleans. Tarif, you're on. What's on your mind?
I have two comments, but they're going to kind of relate dealing with China. Okay, first, free Julian Assange. Okay, yesterday the Chinese Council on Foreign Relations or on Foreign Activities, I don't know, I forgot the correct name. The press secretary came out and was talking about the U.S., how the U.S. blamed everybody for human rights, violations and all that. Then, and also the press secretary said, well, you got a man that's in prison. His name is Julian Assange, and I was like, wow. And so that was a big thing. WikiLeaks tweeted it out yesterday, and I tweeted it again. And also, on the same subject with China, I was watching this little thing that popped up on my YouTube, and it was in my recommendations, and it popped up, and it gave a point of view from China's point of view, right? And it was dealing with the rocket. And it brought up questions that wasn't asked, like when, why is other nations' rockets, when the engines return back to Earth, why they not considered out of control? Right. Why just them? Is it something that the current conditions going on with China and Washington, D.C., dealing with trade sanctions and the spit for tat thing? That's why they're making it seem like China is don't know what they're doing, because China lost. They were saying China lost all the rockets, and then the other rockets were never out of control. So why this rocket dealing with this 20-ton station that went up in space?
Probably because it's competing with the ISS.
Yeah.
Probably because China's launching their own space station. It's they're no longer a collaborator; they're now a competitor. Russia will be soon too, and so we're going to have this return of a space race mentality and the return of competitive behavior and thought processes and the acceptance of that stuff in the media.
Horrible.
But hopefully we get some fast rocket ships out of it. Like, think of a sedan-sized rocket ship, a personal rocket ship, Jamarl. Wouldn't that, if that came out of this, even if
Like a
billions
hybrid.
of people had to die, if we all had our own personal rocket ship, would that be worth it for you? We got other callers.
Does
But I
it
wanted
warp?
to. What do you say?
Warp.
Yes, warp speed, warp technology, for sure.
Oh man, don't give me
folding
that.
space.
Don't give me that. I'm a
Holding
lefty,
space
man.
in front
don't
of it,
put me
behind it.
Don't put me on the spot.
Near teleportation speeds,
I'm
much
going to
faster
say
than the
no
speed
if a lot
light.
of people have to die for it. But
Oh.
privately, we can talk.
But what if trillions have access to this technology? What if the unborn masses?
See, that's the question of like whether or not if you kill 1 million and later on, let's say in 1 million years,
Yeah.
that type of stuff. I mean, I don't necessarily know if you could say the previous deaths were related to the, it's hard to make that link, even if you're looking at it from a God's perspective, I suppose.
Yeah, but returning to the subject, no, the reason we're seeing this reporting, I'm sure, is at least in part because China's launching their own space station.
Yeah. It could be a language thing that we're using now to hit them on that part.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, look at these Chinese so unwieldily in the way, but they might have already assumed that it was going to fall safely in the Indian Ocean. It's very possible.
We got more calls, and so we're going to go to them. At this point, I think we're pretty much full up on calls. So no more calling in, please. We've got 2 on the line. That's about what we have time for. I'm still learning the amount of time to give to each caller. Anyway, Brave calling in from Atlanta. Good to hear from you again. What's on your mind, Brave?
No, I was just calling back from this segment, but concerning this segment with Kim, which was very, very good. I like her for the fact that she has the conversation the way it should be had, and she also thinks forward. She's very forward thinking. These politicians are very crafty in the way that they have us addressing the matters, even in the idea of getting back to normal and what's expected of Biden and his administration. We should consider that. A return, which you guys addressed, a return to normalcy doesn't save him from the upcoming collapse.
Are you seeing, Brave? Are you seeing a return to normal at this point? Because she was saying that we're already starting to see it, and I'm mixed on that. What's your take?
No, I think I would fall in line with you guys. Like there is no return to normalcy because we never go back, and we never go back in America, right? When they establish a certain amount of control, a certain precedent, we never go backwards. So we're not going to see a return to normalcy. As a matter of fact, I would go so far as to say that the normalcy that we obtain is what's dictated by the media arm of the establishment, right?
That is technically, that is true. No, and I agree with you, but then there's this other side of it where I was like, well, maybe I should give the other side some benefit too, which is things kind of are returning to normal. I've been outside on the street in Washington, D.C., and look, there are people there, and I can see their faces. Some of them are wearing masks, some of them aren't, but it is starting to feel much less like I'm trapped in a room along with the rest of the world for a year-long period, and more like this is what it's like to be a human being living in a city, that kind of thing. Brave.
Right, but consider what they had. Consider the links that we had to go to for you to even look at the small little fraction of what we consider normalcy.
600,000 dead.
Be considered normalcy. You see what I'm saying?
I hear you. But you see what I'm saying. Technically, there's something about it, but no, it's like a state shift. We're in another state, and even though one, they're both transparent or they both behave some way similarly to each other, it's a different state of matter that we're in. Anyway, Brave, thank you for the call. We got one more. Will calling in from Chicago. Will, you're on the line. What's on your mind?
Thanks for taking my call. I just wanted to give a quick update. There's a big win on the Stop General Iron front. Basically, for your viewers that don't know, activists on the ground in the southeast side of Chicago have been fighting specifically with a hunger strike.
They were doing that, and then they ended that a while back, didn't they? I was looking into it.
Yep. About 3 months ago, they ended it. No response from the mayor, but Biden's EPA chief actually told Mayor Lori Lightfoot to halt the building of this polluting factory on the southeast side after it was moved from the north side. So because it was like a civil rights issue, I think they didn't want, Kamala and Biden to be wrapped up in this whole business. A few caveats are the mayor never had to make a public statement at all. Okay, this is 4 months, of action and national media kind of presence, I guess, on the subject. And then also, this is just a halting of the factory. So they could do a sneakaroo and build it later and when people aren't paying so much attention. But I find that the victory isn't being covered that much.
Oh,
well, it's the factory, by the way, because I heard about this one, but I didn't. And like you said, the hunger strike took place like months ago. I didn't realize that there was like you sort of reporting on it. What was the factory? It's specifically, just so the audience would know.
General Iron, it's a metal shredding facility. Basically, these tiny particles of metal will get into the kits, like drinking water, soil. Also, it's breathable. Basically.
Yeah, air pollution. I think I remember that coming up exactly. That's what they were worried about, living with that locally. We've got to close this out. Will, thank you for the call. Thank you for the more optimistic update on that story. We've got to take a break for the rest of the day and be back with you tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. Eastern. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Thank you to our engineer, Andre. Thank you to Jamarl Thomas. Thank you to all of our guests. Thank you for calling in, and thank you, that is you, for listening to this morning show, Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. See you again tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. Eastern.